Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. About 10 years ago, I worked at a cemetery. The money was good and it was relatively easy. All I really had to do was drive around in my truck and make sure no kids were causing trouble. Every night was exactly the same, and by then I'd already gotten used to the creepy nature of the job. After a normal night of work, I got off around 6 a.m. and headed home. I didn't usually go to bed until around 11 or so, and while I was getting ready at 10:30, I got a call from my boss. He asked me if I'd seen anything last night, and I said no because I hadn't. He then told me that a grave had been defaced. I swore I didn't see anything though, especially not some group of kids, which are typically the culprit. Anyways, he asked me if I could come back and help him clean it, and I agreed, of course, because I kind of felt like it was my fault. When I got there, I realized I'd underestimated how horrible these writings on the grave had been. This was not the usual small writing or anything. There was writing all over the stone, with horrible words and markings. What made it so much worse was that when we were cleaning everything off, I was finally able to read who the person was. I will obviously not say the name for privacy reasons, but it was a child, only 8 years old when he passed away just a few months prior. I was filled with anger and sadness, unlike any I felt before. I mean, who does that to a kid? I stayed with my boss for a bit, as we checked some surveillance footage. This cemetery was huge though, and the only camera we had was on one building where the funerals were held, and it wasn't very big. And again, this was quite a long time ago, and cameras weren't what they are today. We didn't see anyone at all. My boss notified the town's office, as the cemetery is owned and run by the city, and for the next few weeks they had some new guys come out to go on watch with me from dusk to dawn. Those weeks went by without anything happening. Didn't see anyone or find any defaced graves. One of the guys rode around with me, while the other one stayed near the entrance. I actually became good friends with my watch partner. We wondered and talked about what the defacer looked like, and after some time it seemed like we'd never get to know. Nothing was really happening anymore, and it kind of seemed like a one-and-done type of screwed-up situation. Eventually, the other watch guards left due to the inactivity, and it was back to just me. Another week went by of nothing, before something happened again. One night, as I had just started my shift and began patrolling, I drove all the way to the back of the cemetery, got out and began my walk, which I had to start doing to see if any graves had writing or whatnot. As I was getting to about where the kid's grave was, I realized that something was off. I was a couple 100 feet away from the kid's grave, and it was pitch black, but something looked out of place. I stared in that direction for a whole 30 seconds, getting a little creeped out even. Then I started walking closer, shining my dim flashlight all around the area. Once I was just 100 feet away, I shined my flashlight again at the kid's grave. The light barely reached that far, and in the dim, foggy darkness, I could see a black figure laying on the ground completely still next to the grave. Obviously, I was horrified. I didn't know if it was a dead body that had been dug up or a living person trying to hide. I stepped closer, slowly, and once I was maybe 40 or 50 feet away, I almost got a heart attack as the figure jumped up and sprinted into the dark field of graves, completely disappearing in the darkness in just a few seconds. I stood in place, shocked, horrified, and confused. Once I got a hold of myself, I ran back to the truck and radioed for the police. Then I went back over to the kid's grave. I warn you, what I saw was really disturbing. In front of the gravestone was a hole. It wasn't a big hole, nothing done from a shovel, but more like someone's hands. It didn't even go very deep, maybe just a foot. Either way though, someone had tried to dig up this child's grave with their bare hands, and it made me sick. I'm not sure what the person was trying to achieve, but unfortunately we never figured out who did it, but rest assured it never happened again. The town hired 2 new people permanently, and one of us always kept watch over that grave specifically, while the other 2 scouted the area. The city also had more people on watch throughout the day as well. To this day, that's been by far the worst thing I've seen while doing graveyard work. No ghosts, no creatures, just horrible human beings. I'm a community patrol officer for a neighborhood in southern Las Vegas. If you aren't familiar with this occupation, it's nothing like a police officer or anything. I'm just a regular 25-year-old that drives a small patrol vehicle around nice neighborhoods to make the residents feel safer. It's a pretty common thing around here, since there's a lot of rich neighborhoods right next to a violent city. On my patrols, I have to also report specific community violations. For instance, some housing communities require bushes to be trimmed every week. So if I see an overgrown bush, I have to report it and leave a note at the residence. It's petty, and I personally find it weird that people like to live in neighborhoods like that. But it gives me a job, so I can't complain too much. Anyway, I primarily work 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. It's an odd shift, but that's just how they schedule for some reason. I'd never seen anything strange before this incident. The only things I'd ever really see were groups of teenagers doing dumb shit at the parks at 1 a.m. But last week I had something happen that was beyond disturbing, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was doing my regular patrol, which was a specific route we had to take during the middle, beginning, and end of our shifts. This was my mid-shift patrol, so it was about 10 p.m. and pretty quiet outside. During the drive, I have to check the community pools to make sure they are locked for the night. I pulled into the small parking lot and walked over to the gate. I quickly walked inside and checked the pool area to make sure nobody was still inside, then went back out and locked it. As I made my way over to my car, I noticed a hooded man sitting on one of the park benches not far from where I was. Both of his hands were in his pockets, and he seemed to just be staring at the ground. Honestly, I thought this dude was just waiting for his drug dealer or something, but I didn't know, nor did I really care. I got back in my car and continued on with my route. The community is large, and the routes take probably an hour to complete with no traffic. By the time I finished, it was just about midnight. In the next little bit, all I had to do was drive around the neighborhoods. I mindlessly moved the car through the streets for a while, before finding myself back by the pool, to which I noticed that the man was no longer sitting on the bench. I slowed the car a bit, looking around the sidewalks in the park purely out of curiosity, but I didn't see him anywhere. Not thinking much of it, I kept on. As I drove past the dark, empty park, I couldn't help but get an uneasy sense going through me. I don't know what it was, but something felt off. I continued for a few more minutes before pulling up to a stop sign and noticed a man on the side as if he was going to walk across. After a few seconds, I recognized him as the same hooded man from earlier. He slowly made his way across, but stopped halfway and turned to face me. Being only a few feet away, he quickly walked up to my window, trying to ask me something. I cracked the window slightly, and the man quickly asked me where a specific address was. Of course, I said I didn't know. Sure, I could have looked it up or given him a general direction, but the circumstances of the situation felt very off. Even more oddly, he didn't even have any emotion or response when I said I didn't know. He just stood in silence for a second, then repeated his question exactly as he said it before. This was when I really started to get nervous and feel unsafe. I told him I needed to leave, quickly rolling up my window and beginning to move forward. The man didn't do anything as I drove off. Looking in my rearview mirror, he was just standing there in the middle of the road watching me drive away. I parked down by a nearby street by one of the houses, then collected my thoughts. It was a really weird encounter, but was it reason enough to call the police? I didn't know. As bad as it sounds, calling the police while at work is a big deal, and I didn't want to unless it was actually necessary. The big question that kept coming up in my mind, though, was why was he looking for that address? I decided to type it into my GPS, and it was just a few minutes away, inside the neighborhood I was patrolling. So, I got back on the road and made my way over to the address. When I arrived, it seemed like every other ordinary house at 1 a.m. All the lights were off and nobody was outside. I parked on the other side of the street and waited for a bit. But not even 30 seconds later, the hooded man came into sight, walking down the sidewalk towards the house. I watched from my car as he walked up their driveway and up to their front door. He knocked a few times, then waited for a while before knocking again. Almost a whole minute went by before someone answered the door. Immediately, the hooded man slammed his body into the homeowner and fought his way inside the home. I was in shock, seeing something like this for the first time happening right in front of me. I controlled myself as soon as I could though and called the police. As I sat waiting in fear, I didn't see any movement for 2 or 3 minutes. I debated with myself whether or not to go in and try and help the homeowner. Honestly though, I was terrified and didn't want to make an already horrible situation even worse, so I stayed in my car. Suddenly, the front door moved a little, then swung open abruptly, followed by the hooded man sprinting out and running off down the street. The police didn't arrive until almost 10 minutes later. I don't know what took so long. I'm sure it wasn't anyone's fault, but part of me was furious. By then, the man was long gone and the homeowner was laying inside, having been beaten so hard that he was unconscious. Over the next few days, more unfortunate information came in. The homeowner didn't recognize the man from anywhere and barely even remembered the situation. But the guy also didn't steal anything from his house. This was very unusual, as the man had clearly known of the homeowner's address, and his only known goal was to hurt the homeowner. Thus, it didn't make much sense for the suspect to not be someone he knew. The whole thing was very strange, and it still makes me feel uneasy. It's only been a week since this happened though, so hopefully more information comes up, and the hooded man gets caught. I had recently graduated when this occurred a few years ago, and was taking full advantage of my summer vacation. I had started working full-time at the high school where I had just completed my studies, since I needed the money for college. My family had asked me to accompany them to my grandparents' home in Virginia, but I had declined because I had already purchased tickets for a concert that was set to take place on the very day we had to depart. I didn't mind staying behind at all. I mean, what 18-year-old doesn't want a house to themselves for a full week? Furthermore, I had no concerns that my neighbors would complain about the parties or cause me any kind of inconvenience because most of them were gone as well. I had a strong desire for some fried chicken that day, which took me out of the house. On my way back, there was an accident on the main road, causing a whole line of traffic. So I decided to take a shortcut and was relying solely on Google Maps to get me home. I noticed a light turn on as I passed a mechanic shop along the route. There was another car, but this car had only one functional headlight, which was really weird. I distinctly recall finding it really odd that this automobile had abruptly turned on its light as I was passing, and I was even more alarmed when it departed behind me. But I was aware that I have a tendency to be paranoid in that I frequently wonder if someone is watching me and whether they have malicious intentions. I dismissed the idea as a weird coincidence and moved on. I started to stress out as I got closer to my neighborhood and realized that the car was still following me. My fear was increased by the fact that I was low on gas at the moment. I had two choices at this point. Either I turn around and drive home while the strange car pursues, or I just drive about and see if it follows or not. Driving around, however, seemed to be a very dangerous alternative because I wasn't sure what I would do if my car ran out of fuel in the middle of the road, leaving me trapped with this creep. I reasoned that I'd better take a chance in a familiar setting, rather than on the side of a lonely, dusky country road. Once this was decided, I pulled onto my street and felt my heart drop as the car with one headlight turned directly behind me. At this moment, I thought I was doomed. I started pulling into my driveway because there was nothing else I could do, and to my absolute horror, they started to follow me up. Now that I think about it, I believe I should have called the police, but at the time I was so engrossed in my own thoughts that the idea never even entered my head. I might have contacted my dad, who would have gotten his rifle if he was home, but he and the rest of the family were 12 hours away at the time. I stopped and placed my car in reverse when the car started to follow me up the driveway. They reversed in response, but they also came to a stop at the bottom, thus blocking my way out. I started moving forward again, but everything just kept repeating. I drove, they followed, I reversed, and they blocked my exit, over and over again a couple of times. Finally, I hurriedly pulled further up the driveway and swung my car around to confront them. They had already covered more than half of my driveway by this point. I was afraid, alone, and furious. I opened the car door and stepped out with my small pocket knife firmly in my right hand, and my headlights blazing directly into their face. Because I've always been naturally paranoid, as I've already mentioned, I used to keep a small knife between my seat and the car door. I shouted at them, holding the knife out. I merely hoped that they would be panicked. I think they might have believed I was a girl or weak, or maybe had not expected me to react so aggressively. They backed out of my driveway gradually and slowly made their way down the street. But then they parked their car by a neighbor's house down the road, and through the darkness, I could see someone get out. It was at this point that I began to think more clearly and quickly ran inside and called the police. I then went over to the front window, looking out of the dark neighborhood streets, but couldn't see any movement. My adrenaline was fading, and I began to panic even more than I was when I was standing in the driveway. Just then, footsteps were heard running around the outside of my house, followed by a nearby window shaking as they tried to forcefully open it. I was terrified and losing my mind in the panic of the moment. The man continued to run around the house, testing every door and window, trying to force them open. I knew I kept everything locked, but I was worried he may still find a way to break in. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, then called 911 again to ask for an update. I was thankful to hear that they were in the neighborhood less than a minute away. The man began banging against the front door, yelling for me to open it. 2 cop cars pulled into the driveway just in time though, and surprisingly, the man didn't run or anything. I washed through the windows as they put him in cuffs, then I made my way outside to greet the officers. The guy was trying to convince one of the cops that he wasn't doing anything wrong, but of course the cop wasn't buying it. Anyway, long story short, it turned out the man was heavily under the influence of both drugs and alcohol at the time. He never explained what his plans for following me or trying to break into my house were, but considering his state, it couldn't have been good. Luckily, I don't have to worry about seeing him for a long time. I'm 29, and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lives just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, being anywhere from a few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. In the days leading up to the trip, though, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I'd already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead, then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail like you typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have defined paths, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically, there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward. And when you get there, you can see your next landmark, and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking toward a ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched the tent and got a fire going, then heated up some of the food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I laid in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up. My first thought was a black bear, possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight into the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators. But again, there were no sounds of anything running away. It was really strange because the stick snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something stepping on it. I stayed outside the tent for a while, looking around constantly before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else at the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, then pitched the tent and set up my camp on the tree line beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out here. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were, though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. And what I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up and grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of the footsteps. I saw the bare back of them running away in the distance. My heart was beating rapidly. I looked down and saw footprints all around my tent, like they had been walking around me and searching the campsite. I tried to get the campfire going again as fast as I could so I could see better. I was terrified. I had nowhere to go and nobody to help me. I sat at the fire all night, keeping my head on a swivel, but I never saw or heard anything else. In the morning, I snapped a few pictures of the lake, then started the hike back. I had planned to stay for a whole day. I wasn't comfortable anymore, feeling like I was being followed. I was able to make it back without any more trouble, thankfully. But along my journey, I began noticing several things missing from my backpack. Small things like food, a few tools, etc. But I always had my bag with me. Even today, I wonder if whoever had been outside my tent that one night had actually snuck inside and stole from my bag while I was asleep. Even the thought of it makes my whole body shiver. I've always loved camping, especially in the fall when the leaves are changing colors and the air is crisp. So, when my best friend, who I'll call Katie, asked me to go camping with her for her birthday, I jumped at the chance. We packed up our gear and headed out to a secluded spot in the woods that Katie's family had been camping at for years. As we hiked in, I felt a sense of silence. In a good way, though. It was like we were the only two people in the world. The hike was relatively short, and when we arrived at the campsite, we both started working on setting everything up. This only took a portion of the hour, and after we finished, we decided to go for a hike. We went pretty much straight north, off the beaten path, just exploring, until we came across a faded trail. Katie had never seen it before, and said there was nothing out here, so she was confused. We followed the trail that wound through the woods and eventually led us to what looked like an old abandoned cabin. It was small and weather-beaten, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Katie was eager to explore it, and I was a bit hesitant, but also really curious. We stepped inside. It was clear that no one had been there for years. We poked around for a while, looking for any interesting artifacts or clues about who had lived there, but we didn't find anything. As we were about to leave, I noticed something strange. There was a door in the corner of the cabin that I hadn't noticed before. It was very small and had a padlock on it. I pointed it out to Katie, and we both became curious. The lock looked really old, completely rusted all over. I knocked on the door, knowing nobody would be inside, but I just wanted to make sure. Katie went outside and grabbed a large rock, handing it to me. I smashed it against the lock, only taking a few good hits until it broke open. The door dragged against the ground as we pulled it back. Inside, it was pitch black and we couldn't see anything. Katie pointed her flashlight through the doorway, and there was a staircase leading down. We both were creeped out now, but we assured ourselves that nobody has been here for years and there really wasn't anything realistic to fear. I led the way down the steep staircase. It wasn't very long, only 8 to 10 steps, before it opened into a room. What we saw was very disturbing and strange. There were several small mattresses on the ground, along with some other random furniture. They looked very modern though, like the mattresses had to be within 5 years old. Something about it just hit me with fear, and both of us rushed upstairs. We pushed the door shut again and stood there, unsure of what we just saw. We debated whether or not it was a crime scene of some sort, because it all just looked so out of place. As I was talking, Katie suddenly shushed me. In the distance, footsteps were coming toward the cabin. They came all the way up to it, but oddly, they walked right past it without stopping. I could see confusion on Katie's face too. As soon as they were far away, we ran back to our campsite, then right back to Katie's place. We called the police, just in case it was something. To us, the fact that the person kept walking without even stopping meant that they were familiar with the cabin. We didn't know if it was due to something bad or not, so we decided to let the police decide. They searched the cabin and the area around it, but ultimately found nothing leading to anything. They said it was really strange, and even seemed like it had to be something bad, but there just wasn't anything justifying that. It ended up becoming a big thing in our town for a while, having the community talk about every possibility and theory of what the cabin was used for. The city even had the cabin torn down because they didn't want people visiting it. It still has never been figured out, and it probably never will, but there's just something in me that knows something awful happened there. Every year as a kid, my family would go on these big camping trips. I was always really excited because we lived in Arizona, where there's pretty much nothing, and we'd camp in Washington. Seeing trees and grass was my favorite part, but I also got to see all my cousins, and even though we only saw each other a couple times a year, we were really close. My favorite cousin, who was more like a brother to me, was Luis. He was a year older than me, and we were inseparable when together. Because of what happened, we became even closer after that camping trip. I think it took us both a while to understand what really went on and what more could have happened to us. It started when we had been there for 2 days already. Most of our family was either in the lake or by the campfire talking. Luis didn't like to swim, so we decided to play in the woods instead. We played a version of tag called Bandit. We'd switch off being the cop and chase the other one, who was the bandit, until we catch them. We would play for hours, but in the woods, it's easy to just keep running and not know where you're going. We tried our best to stay within viewing distance, but when Luis started chasing me with a huge stick, I guess my adrenaline kicked into hyperspeed. I don't know how long I ran for, But eventually, I ended up at an old-looking trailer. Luis wasn't far behind, but I remember him throwing the stick down, his focus now on what we both assumed was an abandoned trailer. We discussed investigating it further, and I'm not really sure why, but we decided not to. We started walking back, but we didn't really know where we were going. Probably about 10 minutes into our walk, we saw a couple coming towards us, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman approaches us and is really nice, while the man stayed back. She asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names and ages. And I remember when we told her how old we were, she looked back at the guy and then to us again. She told us we don't have to be scared, and she'll help us find our way home after they drop off their stuff at their campsite. She said we could also make s'mores if we wanted. Luis and I were hesitant, but she seemed really nice, and it was still daytime. So for some reason, that made everything way less suspicious. In my 7-year-old brain, bad people only do things at night, so we were fine. We walked with them for a while, following them back to their camp. While her and Luis were talking, I glanced over at the shopping cart. It was filled with a bunch of rusty metal things, in what looked like to be nothing new. Nothing was in bags. Everything just looked like trash they'd found somewhere. I started to get really uncomfortable, and I could tell Luis was too. Every time I'd look over at the guy, he was never smiling, and sometimes he'd be staring at me with a blank stare. This was 18 years ago, and I still remember how creepy he looked. We walked a bit further until the trailer came back into view, and the woman grabbed Luis and mine's hand and asked if we were excited for s'mores. Suddenly, I heard Luis's name being called, and then mine. We all stopped for a second, and the lady squeezed my hand a bit tighter. She asked something to the guy, along the lines of what they should do. He responded, but I don't remember what he said. The lady started to turn us toward the trailer, while holding us tighter and tighter. She started to speed up as well, into sort of a fast walk. I looked back and saw my sister through the trees. Without hesitation, I yelled her name, and the lady immediately let go of my hand. Luis and I ran to her as she made her way towards us. My sister yelled to the others that she'd found us. My mom and dad thanked the couple who had told them this elaborate story and how they've been trying to find our parents for a while now, and that we're such sweet boys and everything. I remember my parents inviting the couple over for burgers, but thankfully they declined. I think because the lady was so nice and that we were found safe, that my parents didn't think twice. I do recall my dad and uncle talking about how creepy the guy was, though. My cousin and I ended up telling my sister, who found us, that the couple was weird, but I don't think she understood what we meant. It wasn't until my cousin and I were old enough to understand that some people have really bad intentions. We talked about it again in depth, and we both came to the conclusion that by the looks of it, they were tight on money and were probably going to sell us or something. For years growing up, I had kept this from my parents because I was supposed to be the strong man of the family, and thinking about that time made me feel gross and preyed upon. Luis also felt embarrassed as he was older than me and felt he had failed to protect me. We eventually told our parents a few years ago, but I wish we had told them immediately, and maybe something could have been done. Nowadays, I never let my kids out of my sight, and always let them know that they can tell me anything without fear of being judged, especially my son. I'm not sure everyone is aware of the biggest difference between Target and Walmart. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but the simple truth is that Target attracts a better quality of customers. I would never work the late shift at Walmart. The conditions at Target, however, have always felt safe and secure. Because I'm small and I'm female, at closing time my normal duties include restocking all the discarded garments in the fitting rooms, The place is usually a horror show. I can only imagine what Walmart must look like. I just started to rehang everything when I was summoned up to checkout. Their normal closing cashier had a family emergency, and they needed me to work the trenches. I wish I ignored their summons. Even at Target, the last customers are either night owls or freak shows. At first glance, the guy looked like a night owl. Long hair, mid-30s, some colorful ink. He was buying a 50-gallon plastic storage bin. When he took off the lid, revealing the other purchases he'd stowed away inside, sirens began ringing in my head. 12-pack of extra-strength duct tape, 20-ounce steel rib hammer, 6-piece set of pliers, 9-inch tapered fillet knife, 20-volt cordless reciprocating saw, a half-dozen 32-ounce bottles of sulfuric acid, 10-pack of clear plastic tops. While I was ringing him up, my eyes kept wavering between the toolkit of torture devices and the tattoos on his forearm. He had lots of tribal designs and alpha male images, like wrapped around elk horns and barbed wire strips. But the one image that really grabbed me by the nose hairs was a great white shark head clamped onto a Winnie the Pooh bear that was bleeding puffs of stuffing from all the shark tooth punctures. I kept my face down, eyes on my own business. If I didn't raise his antenna, maybe we could both just pretend he wasn't prepping for a spree of murder and dismemberment. But then he spoke. I've got a home improvement job this weekend. He had a squeaky voice with a slight lisp, like a cartoon caterbird. My old lady is always nagging me to get the basement finished. Are you someone's old lady? No. You live alone? Just me and my 3 German shepherds. Another customer entered my aisle, pushing a cart with a baby carrier mounted in the child's seat. I could hear the baby cooing. The woman watched as I finally finished scanning the sociopath's purchases, replacing them all back inside a storage bin. I noticed that her antenna was buzzing, eyes big as saucers. Your total is $336.14. He whipped out a wad of bills and peeled out some 50s. As I finished the transaction and handed him the change, he turned his attention to the young mother. Can I see the baby? She whispered, of course, and tried putting on a polite smile, but her lips were trembling as she pivoted the baby carrier so that he could put eyes on her beloved. The baby was no more than a few months old, had bright blue eyes, and seemed focused on the creation of spitballs. Boy or girl? The sociopath asked. Girl? What's her name? The new mother hesitated. Sarah. The sociopath took the baby's hand and wiggled it. The mother and I watched the sordid handshake with matching distress. Well, you both have a blessed night. He grabbed his bin of horrors and ambled out the doors. The mother immediately began wiping down her baby's hand with an antibacterial towel. I've never seen him around here. Her eyes darted between the doors and her baby. Neither have I. Hopefully he's just passing through. I rang up her box of Pampers and bottle of Pinot Noir. I'm going to be drinking that whole bottle tonight. She paid, and I bagged up the bottle. I was wondering. Her eyes kept moving between the doors and her baby, then to me. Would you mind having someone walk us to our car? Under normal circumstances, I would have walked her up myself, but I didn't feel any more capable of fending off a sociopath than she did. I scanned the store, but nobody else was around, red-vested or otherwise. I can try to get somebody. I looked around, searching for the nearest public address station. I think my uncertainty must have been obvious because the mother just put on a false smile of reassurance. No need to bother. He's probably gone by now. Well, I don't have any other customers at the moment. I made a last desperate scan of the checkout area. I'd be happy to walk you out to your car. I log out of my register, noting the young mother's look of gratitude. We started walking towards the glass doors. How old is Sarah? Just under a year. Well, she's beautiful. Just like an angel. You haven't been awakened from dead sleep by a crime. Not much of an angel at 3 a.m. feedings. I guess not. That doesn't sound angelic. We exited this store and made a long scan of the parking lot. There weren't any panel vans or monster trucks. The sociopath had apparently vamoosed. I'm over there, the Honda. We rolled the cart back to her hatchback. Sarah making gurgles and gibberish. The mother used her fob to pop open her hatchback, and I loaded her stuff inside as she got her baby carrier situated in the back seat. As she opened the driver's door, she handed me a $20 bill. Thank you so much for the escort. I feel kind of foolish. Oh, no need. I waved the money. Sociopathic killers are downright scary, especially ones with the voices of Tweety Bird. You got that right, sweet cheeks. Came the squeaky and lisping voice from behind as my head got smashed against the doorframe. I went limp and dazed, warm blood cascading down my forehead as my mouth and hands got bound and folded and stuffed in the back alongside the Pampers and wine. Then, the sociopath loaded his plastic bin. He slammed the hatchback and got in the front passenger seat. Did she really say I have a Tweety Bird voice? The young mother started the engine. Let's discuss how your old lady is always nagging you to get the basement finished. Uh-oh. I'm going to pay for that one, aren't I? Well, somebody's going to pay for that. They both laughed. The baby cried. The car started to move. Luckily, someone up above must have been looking out for me, because I could see daylight under the hatchback. It hadn't fully latched. A high-speed ejection with hands both bound was an idea. My best shot was to wait until we slowed to a populated area, then log roll onto the door and drop onto the pavement. That was my plan. But if it didn't succeed, if I didn't kill myself first, this killer clown would dismember me slow and keep me in fleshy ribbons for days. Working retail is always challenging. There's the old adage that the customer is always right. If that were true, I don't think stores would have policies, rules, or even prices. The simple fact is that the customer isn't always right. In fact, sometimes they're complete assholes. This became abundantly clear during the pandemic. Shortly before COVID-19 necessitated restrictions, I was promoted to floor manager of the local Target. Let me preface this by saying that overall, most of our customers were very accommodating with our mandatory mask requirement. They saw all the employees wearing them as well and saw them as a sign of solidarity. However, we managed to have a few Karens and Kens enter the store. Some cited their reasons for not wanting to wear a mask as medical and others because of constitutional freedoms, but most often shouted both reasons. They made a scene, and while they didn't leave quietly, they all eventually left peacefully. Until that day. The store had only been open for a couple of hours. I was making my rounds doing inventory checks for the following order. I walked by the hardware departments, did a quick glance, then doubled back. Sure enough, there was a man without a mask perusing the various tools. I sighed and took a moment to hide my frustration. Technically, it was the door greeter's responsibility to flag people down at the entrance and tell them our policy. Unfortunately, most of these jobs went to our elderly employees. More than a few were sympathetic to the anti-maskers' plight. But since they were on a fixed budget, it was hard to read them the riot act, and some people still slipped through the cracks. Taking a deep breath, I buried my frustration and put on my fake smile. My mask covered it, but it was so ingrained after years of working in retail that it formed on reflex. As I walked closer to the man, he came into greater detail. He wore ripped and faded jeans and a button-up flannel shirt, the standard get-up for most of our blue-collar customers. But as he stood up, I braced myself. He was a towering man, over 6 feet tall and twice as wide as me. Though he had a beer gut that was testing the limits of his belt, his arms rippled with muscles that must have been from a very hands-on job. But I remembered all the other alterations. While they were unpleasant, none of the customers were violent, so I found my nerve and walked up to him. "Excuse me, sir." He glanced up at me, his eyes beady above a bushy beard. "Yeah, buddy. You got any copper loose screws? Boss's dipshit son tried to put something together using regular ones. Affirmative action, am I right?" I frowned, thankful that my mask concealed my sudden irritation. "I think that's nepotism, actually." "Nepo what?" Instantly his smile shifted into an annoyed scowl. "Look, college boy, don't flap your gums at me because you know some 10-buck words. You got the goddamn screws or not?" I took a deep breath, remembering the script from my training. "Sir, I'll be more than happy to look for the items you want as soon as you put on a mask." Red crept up his neck and slowly worked its way up his face. "Just give me the goddamn screws and I'll be out of here in a minute. Then you can go back to being targets for Dell." "Sir?" I tried to remain calm, but I could hear the irritation in my voice. "It doesn't matter how long you spend in the store. You must wear a mask when you step inside or you'll have to leave." His nostrils flared as he brandished his arms wildly. "What is this? Soviet Russia? Last time I checked, I live in the good old US of A. And guess what? America's the land of the free. And if you don't like it, you go back to where the country you came from." That would be this one, the same as you. Even though he was bigger than me, I took comfort in the walkie-talkie at my belt, which I unclipped. And if you respect freedoms, you should know that Target is a privately held company. As such, we can deny service to anyone not following state or company policy. Now put on a mask, or I will call security and have you escorted off our property. The red spread up to his forehead. He stood huffing and puffing before letting out a long breath. He placed himself between me and the tools, then put a beefy hand on my shoulder. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Think you can outsmart a hammer?" I blinked in confusion. "What?" He yanked a hammer from off the shelf. Think fast. He spun in a whirl and the hammer collided with my jaw. The immense pain lifted me off my feet, and I fell hard onto my back and skull. I tried to scream for help, but my jaw refused to close. That son of a bitch had broken it. I knew I had to get up, get on my feet, and get the hell out of there. But I was a prisoner in my own body. I silently shouted at my body to move, but it refused to listen. The man dropped the hammer beside me, and I sagged in relief, thinking it was over. Instead, the man opened several packages, tearing through the plastic with his bare hands. I couldn't make out the first items as packing to damage, but the second box was in a slightly better condition. Staples. He hunkered beside me and showed me the stapler gun, clicking it twice so 2 staples landed on my forehead. "Let's see how you like it when someone makes you wear a mask." I squirmed, but he grabbed hold of my jaw. The pain shot through my body, paralyzing me in place, until a new pain erupted near my ear and in my throat. Hot blood ran down my face as he forced my face to the other side, stapling the mask straps onto my face. Then he wrenched my jaw shut, stapling my lips closed. "What? No fancy words now." He wiped his hands and picked up the hammer. "Round 2. I braced myself and closed my eyes. Noise erupted around me, and I was sure the man was bashing my head in. The pain too intense to register. But the hammer clattered to the ground again, and when I opened my eyes, I saw a demolished tile beside me. The man turned away and picked something off the shelf. "Oh, here they are." Then turned and walked away. I passed out as the man paid for the screws, and I wasn't found until a half hour later. I was rushed to the hospital where they removed the staples and wired my jaw shut. The whole thing was caught on camera, and he was quickly apprehended. The worst of the pandemic is over, but I still wear my mask. My coworkers think it's a sign of defiance against the man who assaulted me, but they're wrong. It's to hide my scars. I was on a solo vacation to Oregon this year, toward the end of winter. I had some extra vacation days at work, so I was just trying to use them up. The city I stayed by was small, but I really wasn't there for that. I wanted to be in the beautiful nature that Upper Oregon had, not in some crowded city. The small city had a few hotels, but they were strangely really expensive, which was why I went with an Airbnb. It turned out to be a decent ways away from the city too, which was a benefit in my eyes. The only downside was that it was a guest home, meaning there was a main house on the property that the owners lived in right next door. It wasn't the isolation I wanted, but it was better than being in a city. I arrived at the Airbnb late at night, tired from my long drive. The house was surrounded by a dense forest, which made it difficult to see anything beyond the faint glow of the porch light. As I approached the door, I knocked softly. The host, a friendly woman in her 40s, greeted me at the door and led me to the guest house. She gave me the key and showed me around the room, explaining how to use the various appliances and where to find extra blankets. We made a bit of small talk, where she told me that she'd lived here alone for 15 years and talked about the wildlife and everything. After she left, I settled in and made myself some food. As I sat at the kitchen table, I realized the glare from the moon was lighting up the whole house, and that's when I noticed that there were no curtains on any of the windows. It was odd, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. As I got ready for bed, I shoved an extra blanket over one of the windows to help block some of the light, but it didn't really work too well. The bed was pretty comfortable, but I had some trouble sleeping, waking up a few times because of a strange smell that the room had. I opened the window to let in some fresh air, but I'm pretty sure the smell was stained into the wood or something. I hoped I'd get used to it after a day, but I never did. In the morning, I woke up early and had a bowl of granola for breakfast. But while I packed my hiking bag, I got startled by the woman standing at the front window. She smiled and waved once we made eye contact. I opened the front door. She asked how my night was and if I had any problems. I said no to be non-confrontational, and she laughed. I got my bags together and drove out to a nearby hiking trail. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was late, maybe 9 o'clock. I pulled up the gravel driveway and started walking to the door when I saw the woman quickly walk away from behind the guest house. I stopped and waited for a second, a little weirded out, then kept walking and went inside. Nothing was out of place, so I didn't bother worrying about it. I went to bed a half hour later, not even bothering to cover the window again. But after just a couple minutes, I heard the distinct sound of a car coming down the gravel driveway. It pulled all the way up to the house and stopped. Someone got out, and I heard the woman greet them. They were whispering, standing outside still. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could tell the other person was a man from the sound of their whispers. I heard them begin walking, not into the main house, toward the guest house I was in. I opened my eyes wider and paid more attention, hearing the footsteps come closer. I looked around at all the windows frantically, feeling vulnerable, like I was in a cage. Whoever was out there walked around the house slowly and stopped by the back wall. I had my eyes fixed on the window in that direction for what felt like forever, waiting for them to leave. Then, I saw the faint glow of their eyes in the corner of the window, looking back at me. I jumped up and they ran. I quickly checked out the window, seeing someone get into a truck and driving away. I immediately packed everything up and got in my car, seeing the woman come outside and try to wave me down as I drove away. I didn't stop until I got home. I don't know what happened or was happening, but something was very wrong. After a few days of thinking about it, I ended up looking into it myself, searching up the house and the woman living there. I found her Facebook account showing that she was married and had been for 15 years. I didn't find much else, but she had told me that she lived alone for 15 years, so something strange was definitely going on. It's been 4 months since, but I still think about it a lot, wondering what the woman was hiding, why the place had such a strange smell, and what the man was trying to do. I was on a quick business trip last year for work and decided to drive instead of flying. I always hated airports and planes, so I would drive any chance I got. I rented 2 Airbnbs, one on the way there and one on the way back. Everything was fine on the way up, but I can't say the same for the trip back. I arrived at the Airbnb late in the evening after a long day of traveling. As I walked around the house, I felt like something wasn't right. The decor was old-fashioned, with dark wood furniture and heavy curtains. The air was shallow, and there was a lingering smell of cigarette smoke. I looked back online, seeing that the pictures showed different furniture, and really a whole different layout too. It was hard to tell if it was even the same house. It was, but it just looked so different. Being tired and annoyed, I brushed it off. I was just there for the night, so as long as it was a place to stay, then that was fine with me. The code on the door worked, so they must have just put up the wrong pictures or lied to get more bookings. I tossed my travel bags against the wall in the shower, then got in bed and fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud noise. It sounded like something had fallen over in the hallway. I sat up in bed, listening intently, but there was no other sound. I tried to go back to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me without checking the house first. I got up and went into the hallway. It was empty. Nobody there, and nothing seeming to have fallen anywhere. I checked the other rooms just in case, but again, there was nothing. I went back to the bedroom, and as I walked in, I caught a glimpse of something moving into the bathroom. I froze. It was silent until a figure stepped out of the doorway. He was tall and thin, looking starved and feral. "Wallet," he said firmly. I fearfully pointed to my bag against the wall, seeing a kitchen knife in his hand. He picked up the bag and slung it around his shoulder, then told me to go into the hallway. As I stepped back, I noticed another man standing at the end of the hallway, looking similar to the other. They both stared at me, like hungry wolves ready to attack at any moment. "Please, just let me go," I said softly. The man in the hallway turned and looked at something around the corner, and my instinct took over, making me run for the front door. I got out and sprinted down the road, making it to a gas station and calling 911. The men were gone, but the cops hinted at robberies and attacks being common in the area. Seeing the neighborhood in the daytime, it was much more apparent. I'd never been there before, so I had no idea that I was staying in a bad area. I never even thought an Airbnb would be in a bad area. The most horrifying part was when I was running away. I swear, I heard more than just 2 sets of footsteps chasing me. My best friend, who I'll call Michael for privacy, was coming back to town from college in the summer of 2018. I was also in college, but stayed in town for my studies. Being that we would only see each other a few days throughout the year, we would take a couple days off and rent an Airbnb or hotel, hang out, party, catch up on life, all that sort of stuff. We both lived with our parents still, so we couldn't do much at home. Anyway, we found a little cottage nestled in the woods, with a cozy fireplace and a great view. It seemed like the perfect spot for a weekend of relaxation and catching up. Plus, it was way cheaper than any of the other Airbnbs and hotels. It was located about 2 hours from where we were. On Friday morning, I drove over to Michael's place and picked him up, then started heading to the Airbnb. We talked and caught up, but if I'm being honest, it was kind of a boring drive. The roads were empty, and we only passed through one town on the way. When we arrived, though, the cabin looked really nice, from the outside at least. We got our bags from the car and opened the front door with the key code. The inside was good, looking just as it did in the pictures, but it wasn't very clean. There were dirty footprints across the floors, looking like someone had been wandering in the forest and didn't take their shoes off. The bedding seemed to have been washed though, which was the more important thing. We settled in and talked for a bit, then went out to wander the forest around the cabin. Both of us were big nature people, enjoying long walks and hikes. We stumbled across a path not far from the back of the cabin and followed it for a while before it ended. Not like a normal end to a path, though. There was no actual point to the path. It was just a straight line through the woods with a very sudden, abrupt ending. It was a bit weird, but really we both didn't think much of it. We followed it back to the cabin as the sun was starting to set. As we got closer, I noticed Michael was looking around a lot, like he was nervous, but he was never one to be scared. "Everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, I just thought I saw someone over there. It's probably nothing, though." I looked where he was pointing, but there wasn't anything to see. It was already somewhat dark by then, so there was no use in looking. When we got back, Michael took a shower, and I started making some of the food we brought. But something felt off. I couldn't help but notice that there seemed to be more footprints around the house than there were before. Some of them even went right up to where our bags were. But as far as I could tell, nothing was missing. I asked Michael what he thought, but he wasn't so convinced, saying he thought the footprints were already there. We continued with our night, getting ready for bed around 10. The way the cabin was set up, there was the living room and kitchen right when you walk in, and then one bedroom that had 2 beds and a bathroom in it. We both took a bed and fell asleep. A few hours into the night, I woke to Michael whispering my name. He was calling for me, telling me to wake up. I looked over and saw him sitting up in his bed. "What's going on?" He pointed at the door. "Someone's inside." Then I heard the soft, intentional, quiet footsteps of someone walking across the cabin, right outside the bedroom door. My heart tightened up. We both sat there, listening to this person fumble around with something out there. And then he came right up to the door. There was a long moment of silence before they turned away and left the cabin. We got up and pushed some furniture against the doors, staying up the rest of the night and leaving first thing in the morning. Maybe we should have called the cops, but in our defense, we were out in the middle of nowhere and had nothing but footprints to back up our case. We got a refund on the next day, since we left early. Oddly, the owner never responded to our message about what happened. No apology or anything. They just refunded the money and said nothing. I used to work at my dad's restaurant when I was in my later teen years. It was just a regular local place, but was open until 2 a.m. every night. During high school, I would only work after school until 8, but once I graduated, I started working the closing shifts to save up money for college. The restaurant would be surprisingly busy at night, all the way up until closing. Mostly it was just people picking up online orders, but sometimes groups of friends would come in and hang out at one of the tables while they ate. I definitely preferred work at night though, as I would be the only one there and didn't have to listen to my dad bossing me around. Anyways, after 6 months of working nights, things started to get pretty weird. It was almost closing, around 1:45 a.m., and I was in the back cleaning when I heard the door ring. I finished up what I was doing and made my way to the front counter. There were 2 young men who looked really tired. One of them came up to the counter while the other one stood at one of the tables. Our dining room was closed for the night, but I can still take a small order if you want it for takeout. The man at the counter just stared at the menu and didn't say anything. I stood there uncomfortably as the man shifted his gaze to behind me as if he was inspecting the place. A few seconds later, the man by the table quickly walked out and the other guy followed. It was definitely the weirdest encounter I'd probably had, and I couldn't really think of any reasonable explanation. I kind of just assumed that they were planning on robbing me, but then decided otherwise for some reason. The next morning I told my dad about it, and he said I could start locking the doors at around 1:45 for the next few days. Another week went by with nothing unusual before it happened again. I had a customer picking up an order around 1:30, and almost as soon as he left, one of the men from last week walked in. It was the one that was standing at the table, and I noticed right away that he was wearing the same exact clothing as last time. However, this time he came up to the counter. He looked me in the eyes for a second, and then asked me if I could help him jumpstart his car. The way he said it was really creepy, and it was very obvious that there was something else going on here. Sorry, I had to stay in the restaurant during my shift. His face immediately shifted into a frown. He said it would only take a minute and no one would know that I laughed. At this point, I knew something was very off and I started to panic a little bit in my head. He started making his way back to the door, gesturing me to follow him. I honestly wasn't sure what to do and was really freaking out, but my fight response was starting and my adrenaline was pumping. It's worth mentioning that I'm not really that big of a guy at all, and this man was much larger than me. Plus, I was pretty confident that the other guy was nearby too, probably ready to jump me if I didn't comply. But I figured I was screwed either way, so I might as well try to fight. I grabbed a pair of scissors we had behind the counter and stood my ground. The man turned around again once he reached the door, and this time he looked angry and demanded that I followed him. At that same instant, a loud bang came from behind me, followed by the back door slamming open. I ran to the back, and as soon as the guy saw me, he bolted right back outside. I turned around quickly and ran back to the front counter, but the other guy had left as well. I obviously called the police afterwards and gave them the security footage, but it was pretty low quality and hard to make out any identity from them. Anyways, I'm still not really sure why they didn't just attack me and rob the place, but my best guess is that they were just trying to rob the store without harming anyone. So as soon as they saw I was gonna fight, they ran. Those 2 could have easily taken me down and made the situation much worse, so I'm glad it didn't turn out that way. I have a little Jack Russell dog named Maggie, and she has a lot of energy, so when we go for walks, it's not uncommon for them to spread to the 2-hour mark. This particular day, I got home from work around 5:30, and the sun doesn't usually set until 6:30 or 7. Almost immediately after walking through the door, I put her leash on and quickly changed, and then we headed out. The walk went as usual, as Maggie just took me in whichever direction she wanted to walk in. Things didn't start to take a turn until about an hour in, when the sun was almost fully down, and unfortunately for me, I'd walked further than I'd realized. If you take your dog for long walks, you know how easy it is to zone out, especially if your dog rarely stops to sniff. We had walked in a direction I had taken normally, but the particular street I was on was unfamiliar, but I still knew the general direction home. I started to turn around, but Maggie was standing still, and then she began whimpering softly, and that's when I saw it. Through the soft light of the sunset, I could make out a huge coyote staring at us in the middle of the street. It was roughly the size of a golden retriever, with matted fur, and with its mouth partially opened, you could see its disgusting, sharp, yellow teeth. I knew exactly what it wanted. I picked Maggie up and started walking the opposite direction. I was a bit fearful, but for some reason I thought it would just go away. I didn't know these streets very well, but what I did know was that I had to keep moving. As I quickly continued, the coyote slowly followed, keeping its distance still. But the darker I got, the more scared I became, and after walking down random neighborhood roads in the darkness for a while, I came to the horrifying realization that I was lost. All the turns had messed with my sense of direction, and I had no idea which way to go. Through the darkness, I could now see the glowing eyes of the beast, and could now hear it yipping and howling. As I walked further through the dark neighborhood streets, every few minutes another set of glowing eyes would appear behind me, and even more, louder howls. I could tell they were getting closer too. I was absolutely terrified at this point, trying to hold back my tears as I was panicking and fearing for both mine and my dog's life. Every once in a while, I'd pass a streetlight and look behind me, revealing the entire pack walking slowly with their heads down, watching my every move. After almost 45 minutes of being followed, I began tiring, and I knew I was far from the safety of my home. Maggie began whimpering louder too, which made me even more emotional, as I knew that she was aware of what may soon happen. The howling and yipping became more frequent, growing louder and closer. I looked back one more time to see all of their eyes staring at me from only 30 to 40 feet away. But suddenly and strangely, they all began to separate, moving to the sides of the road. A few moments later, a small car slowly makes its way between the crowd of coyotes and stops right next to me. A lady rolls down her window and asked me if I needed help. I was so thankful for her and told her to please take me home. There are almost no circumstances in which I would willingly get into a stranger's car, but I really had no other choice. The lady was really nice and seemed terrified for me. I was crying at this point, knowing I had just been moments away from a grueling attack. She kindly dropped me off at my house, which was almost 20 minutes from where she picked me up. I live in a nice neighborhood, one where you don't have to worry about your house being broken into or carjackings. The only growing problem in our neighborhood, and many neighboring ones as well, is coyotes. It's been a few years since this incident happened to me, and as time went on, there became more and more showing up around town, getting bigger and stronger. The public knows to be cautious, especially in parks where there are tons of trees and places for them to make home. Signs were put up letting people know of the popular areas where anywhere between 3 and 20 have been spotted. There have been news stories coming out, such as groups of coyotes leaping over fences and taking small dogs, and larger animals being found torn apart in kids' parks. Very sad stories, and some even a little scary. But you never think of coyotes as being in immediate danger until you're being followed in the middle of the night by a pack of the hungry and merciless. I lived in a small apartment for most of my 20s, as it was all that I could afford since I lived alone. My complex was small and only had 6 total apartments in it. Most of the people living there were older and retired and kept to themselves. I actually liked the fact that I didn't have to interact with any of them every time that I needed to go in or out of the complex, as I'm usually in a rush or just not in the mood to socialize. Anyways, I lived on the top floor, and the room across from me had an old couple living there for almost 2 years before they moved out. I never talked to them, so I didn't really care, to be honest. But several months go by before someone new moves in, and another 2 weeks went by before I actually met them. I was getting ready for work one morning and preparing my packed lunch when I hear the neighbor's door open. I didn't think much of it until another minute went by, and I realized that I never heard the door close. I finished getting ready and put my shoes on, then opened my door to leave. I immediately noticed that the neighbor's door was still open, and a tall man in his 40s or 50s was standing right outside the door facing me. He smiled and introduced himself. I faked a short smile and told him my name, then said I had to go to work and began walking past him. But as I started down the stairs, he asked me to come in for a little bit and have breakfast with him. This was really weird, as I had just told him that I needed to go to work. But I just said sorry and continued down the stairs and out of the complex. While I was at work that day, I thought about how strange the interaction was. Thankfully, when I got back home, I was able to get into my apartment without any interactions. But the next morning, I woke up to a knock at the front door. I was really annoyed because I had work today, and now I was up early, but I quickly got dressed and opened the front door. My neighbor was there, but strangely, he was standing right in front of his open door again. He asked me to join him for breakfast again, to which I obviously declined, and told him in a more aggressive manner to not knock on my door so early. The man didn't seem very happy about my answer, and just kind of stood there. Then he said that I didn't have to leave for work for a while, and I had enough time to eat with him. I knew that there was something wrong with this guy, as there was a lot about that response that was creepy. I firmly said no and then backed away and closed my door, making sure to lock it. Again, the more I thought about this guy, the more creepy and disturbing the interactions seemed. The rest of the day went by as usual though, and I got home around 6. I made some dinner and watched a movie, and got ready for bed around 11. I laid in bed for a while, thinking about my creepy neighbor and wondering what to do about it. I decided that if anything else happens, I'd contact the owner of the complex and have him talk to the guy. Then I leaned over and turned off my lamp and tried to fall asleep. But a few minutes later, I heard the neighbor's door creak open. I waited silently, listening to what the guy was doing, but I couldn't hear anything else. Again, though, I never heard the door close. I was pretty nervous, unsure of what the man could possibly be doing this late at night. Eventually, though, I drifted asleep due to not hearing any further noises for over an hour. I'm not sure how long I slept before a loud knock at the door woke me up. But these knocks didn't come from my front door. They were at my bedroom door. I shot up, completely terrified, and turned on the lights. The only thing I had to defend myself with was a small screwdriver on my nightstand. I grabbed it and stood next to my bed, shaking in fear, before picking up my phone and calling 911. When they arrived at the front door, I quickly got out of my room and opened it. I was surprised the door was even shut, but I told the officers everything and all about my suspicions of the neighbor. Unfortunately, though, there was no real evidence of a break-in, and they couldn't do much at all. I knew what I heard was real, though, and I did not feel safe in my apartment anymore. I called my sister later that day, and she agreed to let me stay at her place for a few days. Those days went by quicker than I hoped, though, and I started driving back to my apartment on Saturday evening. I tried to stay calm, assuring myself that the guy had given up by now, and everything would be okay. I pulled into the parking lot and made my way into the building. The sun had just set, so the staircase was dim. I slowly made my way up, trying to stay quiet as to not let my neighbor know that I was coming up. Once I reached the top, I saw his door was closed and I got a big sense of relief as I quickly made my way through my door and locked it behind me. I dropped my bag in the hallway and turned on the lights as I turned the corner into my living room. I jumped back screaming as the man was sitting right on my couch staring at me with a wide, awful smile. I sprinted out of the entire complex and into my car, then called the police again and waited for them in a nearby parking lot. When they arrived, about 10 minutes later, we drove up to the complex and then went into the apartment while I waited by my car. Surprisingly, they came out just a minute later with the man in handcuffs. They said he was still sitting on the couch and that they also found a small knife in his pocket. The most disturbing part of this whole situation, though, was that when he was questioned, he admitted to breaking in 3 separate times. And I only knew about the 2 incidents, which meant that at one point he was hiding in my apartment, probably watching me without me even knowing. I worked in the warehouse section of a local grocery store a few years back. It was a really small store, being family owned and everything, so we didn't have many employees. Most of the stocking would be done during the day, but me and another guy worked overnights to organize the back room and finish whatever the day shift didn't get done. It was a simple job and honestly paid well compared to other big-name stores. The only downside was that I would work alone 2 nights a week on my co-worker's days off. He did the same on my days off, and we both always complained about it because we'd still have to do the same amount of work, except we'd have to do it by ourselves. This happened on a Friday night, which was my co-worker's day off. I clocked in at 10:30 and started rolling out the boxes to stock. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast. Around 3 hours in, I finished the first set of boxes and went into the back to grab more, when I heard a thud echo through the building. I pulled my headphones out and listened. The building made strange noises sometimes, but I'd never heard them that loud before. I went to the front of the store and looked down the aisles, but it seemed to all be normal. One thing to note is that the store locks the entrance doors at night, but the exit doors are those automatic ones that swing open when you walk by them from the inside. We always leave these unlocked, allowing you to actually pull them open from the outside. It takes a bit of strength and kind of feels like you're breaking the door, but the other stores I used to work at did the same thing too, so I assume it's a regular practice. To be fair, if you weren't a worker, you really would never know that they were unlocked, because a quick pull on the door wouldn't even make it budge. You really have to force it. Anyway, this always made me slightly nervous whenever I'd hear something. Seeing as everything was good though, I went back to work. I was in the aisle in the far left of the store, stocking beverages, when I suddenly saw a figure walk past the aisle. It was in the corner of my eye, so I didn't get a good look, but it was enough to make me jump. I pulled out my headphones again and quickly went to the front, looking down where I thought I saw them walking. They weren't there anymore though. I jogged across the store, looking down each aisle. I was sure I saw someone, but now it was like they disappeared. I even searched the back room and didn't see anything. I wasn't sure if I was just seeing things now, or if it was real. I went back to work, but I was a bit paranoid for the rest of the night, looking around often. I heard a couple more things throughout my shift, checking on them each time, but never finding anything. It wasn't until I talked to my coworker the next night that we decided to check the security cameras. He was technically the overnight manager, so he had access to the security room. We saw nothing unusual for the first hour, but then, around the 1 hour and 20-minute mark, a man could be seen entering through the automatic doors. He was wearing a large jacket and had one hand kept in his pocket the whole time. He walked around the store, sometimes stopping to watch me while I was stalking with my back facing him. It gave me chills watching this guy stare at me without me even knowing. We saw him knock over a box at the 3-hour mark, putting it back quickly and rushing to hide. This was the first sound I heard. After this, we took the footage to the police, but there were no identifying features, so it was worthless. Seeing that man stare at me with one hand in his pocket the whole time was such an eerie feeling, though. Looking like he was hiding a gun or something, deciding whether or not to do something terrible. Or maybe he was waiting for me to catch him first. He never came back. At least, not that I know of. I live with my older brother in a small home just off of a highway. We're both in our mid-20s, working regular jobs, but financially, it's a lot easier on us to split the rent and live together. Anyway, we don't see each other all that often because we work opposite shifts. I work the morning shift and he works overnight. Truthfully, I don't think either of us mind though, because it just feels like we always have our own house when the other is gone. This happened a couple months back, but it still terrifies me. I got home from work around 4 one day and went out with some friends before getting back home by 10. My brother had already left for work, so it was just me. I had work in the morning though, so I didn't have much time to relax before bed. I packed my lunch for tomorrow, then chilled on the couch for just 15 or so minutes, then got in bed. Being pretty tired, I was knocked out in a couple minutes. A few hours later, I woke up, seeing it was 2:30 in the morning. I put my head back on the pillow and closed my eyes, but then I heard my brother come in through the front door. It was way too early for him to be off, but it was around his lunchtime, so I figured he forgot his lunch or something, and I dozed off a minute later. The next day, I woke up and got ready for work. I got my bag together, went to the fridge to get my lunch that I packed yesterday, but it was gone. Right away, I realized my brother had probably taken it last night by accident. I left for work, and during my lunch I just picked up some fast food. When I got back home that day, my brother wasn't home. I wanted to let him know not to take any other food from the bottom drawer, because that was my lunch stuff. I spent an hour cleaning up the kitchen and making tomorrow's lunch, then took a nap on the couch. When I got up around 8, I could tell that my brother had been back at some point, but had left for work already. I heated up some leftovers for dinner, then watched a movie in my room to kill the time. I fell asleep around my usual time, but woke up again in the middle of the night. The time was just before 3, and I heard the front door close as my brother walked into the house. I tiredly grabbed my phone from the nightstand and texted him to not take my food. I was too lazy to get up and talk because I knew I'd have trouble falling back asleep if I did. I got a text back a few seconds later, but it was just a question mark, like he didn't know what I was saying. I didn't want to explain the whole thing over text if he was going to play dumb, so I slowly got out of bed, then walked over to the door. I opened it and went into the kitchen, but he wasn't there. I then walked out into the living room, and in one of our chairs was a random man wearing ragged clothes and had a crazed look in his eyes. I was standing there, frozen from the shock. On the table in front of him was a bunch of food from our fridge and pantry. The man got up quickly, and that's when I saw him holding something in his hand. I turned around and ran for the front door, but I didn't hear him follow me out. I stood at the end of the driveway and for some reason called my brother first. I explained the whole thing, and he told me to call the police right away. During my freakout over the phone, I saw the man appear in the front doorway and then slam the door shut, as if he were keeping me out of my own house. The police came, and the man was still there, waving a knife around and telling them to leave his home. They were able to detain him after a few minutes, but I watched them drag him into the car, and I could say for sure that this man was completely psycho. Apparently he never planned on leaving the house that time, and said it was his house now. How the man got a key to our house is still unknown, but we made sure to change the locks on the doors soon after. It's pretty easy to assume what he planned to do with that knife, but he probably thought my brother was the only one living there, which was why he entered in the middle of the night. If I hadn't woken up and seen him, my brother probably would have been attacked as soon as he walked through the door after work, and I likely would have suffered the same fate in the morning. I was house sitting for one of my best friends last year. They had a few lizards and some fish that I had to feed, along with a bunch of houseplants to water. They were on a 2-week-long business trip, so I agreed to take care of everything while they were away. Their house was a lot nicer than my apartment too, so I was glad to do it. The first week went by, and it was great. It felt kind of like being in an Airbnb. But then one night, while sitting at the table in the kitchen, I heard a man cough right outside the house. It scared me because it was so close, being just outside the back door. I quickly walked over and turned on the outdoor lights to show that I was home. I waited a minute before looking out the window. Whoever was there was gone now. But why were they there in the first place? I stayed extra cautious for a while, but there was nothing else. It was a little past 7, and I had nothing to eat, so I went outside to go pick up some food. But as I was walking out, I noticed some footprints in the yard. The grass was pressed down, and there was a clear path they walked in. I followed them, going from the sidewalk to the back of the house, and then turning around and going back to the sidewalk. I got in my car and went out for food, but thought about it while driving. I couldn't come up with any reason someone would do that. It really just seemed pointless. When I got back to the house, I did a quick search for any more footprints in the grass, but didn't see anything. I went back inside and sat down to watch TV. After an hour, I was starting to get sleepy, so I shut it off and got in bed, sitting up on my phone for a bit. That's when I heard someone outside again. They were walking through the front yard. I listened as they went up to the front door, and then went around to the back door. I got up, more alert now, as I heard the back door shifting around like they were trying to open it. I went to the top of the stairs and flipped the light switch, turning on the downstairs lights. The person stopped. I walked down a few steps, then leaned over the railing and looked at the back door. Nobody was there anymore, and for some reason, that terrified me even more. Seconds later, I saw a shard of glass flying across the living room as I heard a window shatter. From where I was standing, I couldn't see it, but I immediately ran upstairs and into the bedroom. I heard a few coughs, then the glass crunching as they stepped inside. As soon as they were in, everything turned to chaos. It was like they were pushing everything over, hitting and breaking things. I called the police, but I feared they wouldn't make it in time to help me. After a minute of destroying the bottom floor, the intruder ran up the steps and went into one of the spare bedrooms, doing the same thing. Then he came up to the bedroom that I was in. He tried opening the door, but I had locked it. Instead of leaving, he started smashing something against it, trying to break it down. One of the panels from the door nearly flew off, allowing them to reach in and open it. The man stepped in. He was wearing a face mask and a hoodie and was holding a metal baseball bat. I was in the corner of the room, holding back tears as he looked at me in rage. But then he looked away and started smashing the walls and furniture all around the room. He didn't even acknowledge me. He just went around me, destroying the entire room in as little time as possible. Then he ran past me and went into the next room before he finally went downstairs and left the house. I stood in that same spot, frozen, until the police came. My friends came back early the next day to deal with the situation. But basically everything in the house was trashed and destroyed, but nothing was stolen. The police said it almost certainly had to be someone she knew that had something against her, but she couldn't think of anyone who would do this to her. I tried to give a description of the man, but he was fully covered, so I wasn't of much help. The most terrifying part was that the man just ignored me, confidently unthreatened by me. To this day, whoever that was hasn't been back to my friend's house, and their motive still remains unknown. I lived alone in a small house in Upper Wisconsin. It's in a small community with a couple dozen houses in the area, but it's a few miles away from town. I'd been living in that same house for about 4 years, and for the most part, I hadn't had any issues. I liked not being in a busy area and just having trees surrounding the community. I worked a normal 9-to-5 job though, which meant driving into town most days and getting home around 6. This all happened last year, and afterwards, I sold my house and moved closer to town because the thought of it happening again still gives me chills. I woke up one morning at my usual time to get ready for work. I got dressed and made a bowl of cereal, then drove into town. At 5, I started the drive back home. The sun was setting, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, it was dark out. I headed inside and dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, then started searching through the pantry for something to eat for dinner. As I looked through the shelves, though, I noticed something odd. The box of cereal I had for breakfast wasn't where I remembered to have put it. Actually, it wasn't anywhere at all. I looked around the kitchen for a minute, just really confused and thinking that I was losing my mind. I got frustrated after a bit and gave up, making a quick dinner and trying to enjoy the rest of the night. At 10 o'clock, my eyes were getting really heavy, so I turned off the TV and stumbled into the kitchen to fill up my water bottle before bed. Then I went over to the back door to turn off the back porch lights, but just before I switched them off, I saw something far back at the edge of the yard. A figure standing among the trees just past the reach of the lights. I had no way to get a closer look, so I just stood there looking at them for a few seconds until I saw them walk away deeper into the forest. It was really strange and gave me chills, but I wasn't really sure what exactly even happened. I was more confused than anything. I switched off the lights and went to bed. In the morning, I got ready for work again and went downstairs. But when I opened the pantry, The box of cereal was there, the one that I thought had been missing. It was sitting right where I'd left it. I figured I just missed it somehow and quickly ate and went to work. All day, though, I sat at my desk thinking about it. The more I thought of it, the more sure I was that it was not there yesterday. Then the figure by my house came to mind and only got me more freaked out. It was Friday, though, so I had the weekend to relax and collect myself. At 4, my boss let the staff go home early, which was a big relief for me because I couldn't focus anyways. I drove home, getting there just before 5. As soon as I stepped through the door, though, something was off. I didn't know what, but I could just feel it. I walked into the kitchen, and everything seemed to be in place. I froze. It came from the living room. "Hello?" I called out. It was quiet again. I stepped slowly to the entryway of the living room and scanned the room. I took a few more steps in and walked carefully through, checking behind everything. There was nothing, and no one. I went back by the front door, preparing to check upstairs, when I heard sudden footsteps shuffling through the kitchen. I turned my head and looked down the hallway. A man was standing at the far end, looking at me. It was like my brain and body just shut down for a second as we stared at each other. I spun around and swung open the front door. I heard his footsteps coming up behind me as I sprinted out of the house and ran all the way to my neighbor's house. They called the police for me and let me stay with them until they arrived. The man was of course gone by then, but they found one of the window hinges to be broken, allowing access to the home, even when locked. They also found some disturbing evidence of the man having likely been spending hours inside my house, eating my food and everything. There was no way to tell how long it had been going on for. After that, I put my house up for sale and stayed with some relatives until I was able to move. I don't know if that man was harmful, or if he was just living in my house because he could, but I could never shake the sight of him standing at the end of my hallway, staring at me with those dead eyes. Attention horror fans, are you ready for a one-of-a-kind addition to your collection? Get ready to show your support for our horror YouTube channel by owning a special limited edition MJV plush toy. That's right, we're bringing the scares to life with an exclusive high-quality plushie of MJV, our beloved horror character. Imagine having your very own cuddly, huggable version of MJV to keep you company while you binge-watch our spine-chilling content. But you must act fast, because these limited edition plushies will only be available for a short time. So don't wait. Click the link in our bio and sign up with your email to be among the first to know when pre-orders begin. These MJV plushies are the perfect way to support our channel while adding a unique and exciting item to your horror collection. So, what are you waiting for? Get ready to embrace the horror and sign up for your limited edition MJV plushie today. I'm a 31-year-old female, and this happened when I was 29, back in 2020. My friend, let's call her Stacy, told me that she had a friend, I'll call Brianne, that needed a dog sitter because Brianne and her husband were going on a vacation to California. Stacy knew I dog sat on an app called Rover, which is an app where you house sit random strangers' dogs, walk them, you name it. I thought it was the perfect opportunity since I was in need of some cash. $200 to dog sit for 5 days. Why not, right? Brianne showed me around her house a week before I dog sat, while also letting me meet her huge husky named Bear. I'm not going to lie, it was a big husky, a little overweight too, but still adorable. Brianne told me that I was welcome to help myself to whatever food I wanted. The front door also included a lock where you punch in a number code to get in, so it was pretty secure. So, a week rolls around, and I showed up later on a Friday night. not too long after Brianne and her husband left the house to go to California. Things were pretty chill for the first 2 days. I was at work for most of the afternoon, went to feed the dog on my break, came back later at night, but would take Bear for rides in my car. I stayed up late watching movies and let Bear sleep by me when it was time to go to bed. Anyway, after work on a Monday night, I hear a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, and there was a guy that looked like he was wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit odd, but opened the door to see what was up. "Hello, I'm looking for a George," he said. George, I thought. Oh, no, there's no George here. I'm dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday. Looking back, it was pretty stupid to tell a random person at the door I didn't know that I was alone. "Oh, okay. How long are you here?" he said. "Till Wednesday," I responded. "Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you." And then he laughed. I was slightly weirded out and locked the door. I texted Brianne about what just happened. She pretty much just said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again up until I went to bed Wednesday at midnight. As I was laying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked it. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep, then woke up at 3:05 a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It freaked me out a little. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room, where I saw Bear was growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy, with another guy this time, standing there in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone? I didn't bother opening the door this time. 2 guys I didn't know, dressed like security guards at 3 a.m. I made sure all the doors were locked. When I saw that they had walked off, I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have to think Bear. I think his barking could have been what scared them off. I went back inside and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling Brianne because she was in Cali anyway. I'm glad to say I only stayed 1 more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, and I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child. My mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. I was never scared of being alone, mostly because I was in an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs, so when she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift that started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner. We didn't have much of anything for me to eat though, so I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on, as well as a frozen meal, then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back though, I recognized that a man walking a ways behind me was taking all the same turns as me. I picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex. There was nothing else down there, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but also aware that it was most likely just someone else who lives in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I knew that whoever that man was couldn't get inside, if he even was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me. Then from my room, and then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door, requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would do often if they forgot their keys. They would ring all of the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to buzz them in. I waited for a moment, then heard the faint sound of the entrance door unlocking and opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs. Then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed, and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. They knocked again. Hello, your mom asked me to check up on you. Can you just answer the door and let me know you're all right, please? Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear, though, that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man, aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. It still creeps me out, though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still? I was driving home from my friend's house. It was late, I don't know exactly the time, but if I had to guess, it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. I lived 20 minutes away, which wasn't too far, since most houses around here are spread out. The rain and lack of streetlights made it hard to see, though, so I was driving slower and more carefully. 5 minutes down the road, I pulled up to a traffic light. I had the red light, but there was a blue car on the other side who was on the road, partially in the intersection. Its headlights and everything were on, but it was just sitting there at a green light. I couldn't tell if there was something wrong, or maybe they were asleep. But when the lights changed, I drove forward, slowly maneuvering around them. I tried to discreetly look in their car as I passed, but the rain on my window blocked most of my view. Only a moment after passing them and driving down the road again, the blue car turned and started following me down the road, so it wasn't broken down after all. I kept my eye on the mirrors. I wouldn't consider myself a paranoid person, but the situation felt staged. Another minute down the road, the car's headlights started getting brighter in my mirrors as they pulled their car closer to what felt like just a couple of feet from my back bumper. In weather like this, that made me really uncomfortable. I looked back at the road, but saw a small light pop up on my dashboard. It was a signal that one of my tires was low on air. A common signal, but it felt like an odd time for it just to pop up, given the situation. I looked back in my mirrors, seeing the cars still tailing me. They were so close, their headlights almost made it hard to even see the actual car. I was just 4 or 5 minutes away from home, nearing the entrance to the neighborhood, when my dashboard started flickering a new signal. Flat tire. My stomach dropped. The second I saw that signal, I put all the pieces together and was almost 100% sure that this car behind me had done something. I drove another minute, hoping to make it closer to home, but I could feel my car sinking to the left, and I was practically driving on the rims now. I had to pull over. The car behind me did the same. I should have called someone as soon as I parked, but I was so concerned and focused with what the person behind me was doing that it didn't even cross my mind. Though, even if I did call someone, it probably wouldn't have prevented what happened next. Once parked, 3 doors opened from the car and 3 men came out. I only had a few seconds to prepare and react, but I was helpless and defenseless. They ran up to my car, 2 on my side and 1 on the other. One of the men came right up to my window, yelling at me to open the door and pointing a gun at me. It happened so fast, I was just in some dazed state. I started to reach for the door, but the man by the back door smashed something against a window, shattering it, then reached his hand in and opened the back door. They were all still yelling, both at me and at each other. The man in the back reached across, opening the other back door, then reached in front of me to open my door. I was still just sitting there, holding my hands up now to show I wasn't a threat. I knew there was no way out of this, even if I did have a weapon. Once my door was open, the man with the gun pulled me out of the car and slammed me on the ground. The oddest thing is while I was on the ground, looking out into the rainy pavement, all I was thinking about was how cold and wet the pavement was. Not about how I had a gun being pushed into the back of my head, or that I was being robbed and beaten. I think it was my head trying to distance myself from the traumatizing situation I was in. I wasn't on the ground for long before the men by the car called out, and the guy holding me down hit me in the back of the head, causing me to ricochet off the pavement. I wasn't even sure if he hit me with the gun or just his fist, because I was already numb. I'm surprised it didn't knock me out, though. I heard their car doors close, and then driving away. I rolled over, still in a daze, and tried to pick myself up. They'd taken my phone, so I was forced to drive my car home and call the police when I got there, which ended up denting and damaging my rims anyway. The investigation went nowhere, determining only that the suspects had purposefully placed small tire spikes in the road at the intersection I crossed them at. I got lucky to have only hit 1 spike, and for to have caused less damage than usual. They likely planned to ambush me as soon as I hit the trap, but in the end, it didn't make a difference. I'm 24, and I lived alone with my dog, Bear, in a cozy townhome up until 3 months ago. I moved in when I turned 22, having a decent enough job. I loved the home, being the first place I'd ever rented for myself. But 2 years of happy living was ruined by this one night. It was gloomy outside and raining quite a lot. It was my day off, so I was sitting on a chair in my living room, scrolling on my phone. It was 8 p.m., which was just an hour before I usually went to bed. Bear had been sitting by the back door for a while, looking outside. He started whining and ran up to me, which was his way of communicating to me that he needed to go outside. I got up and let him out, then closed the door and stood in the kitchen. While it was just a townhome, there was a small fence separating the backyards, so I didn't have to worry about Bear running away or anything. Also, I should mention that Bear isn't a large dog at all. He's just fluffy and small, like a teddy bear. Not long, maybe 15 or 20 seconds after I let him outside, I heard him whimper and bark. It was very clearly a cowering bark, like he was running away from something. It scared me, and I rushed to the door and looked out, seeing Bear running back towards me with his tail between his legs. Once he was inside, I leaned my head outside and scanned the backyard, expecting a coyote or something to be lurking by the fence, but nothing was there. I made sure Bear was okay, then locked up my door. He never does anything like that, so that made me really worried for him. I let him sit on my lap for the rest of the night. Through the next 30 minutes, he was constantly perking his head up and staring at the windows and doors, a different one each time. Then, after 45 minutes of sitting there, Bear turned his head and stared at the window behind me, lowering his ears and growling. "Bear," I said, turning to look where he was looking, and right in the window, just a couple feet from us, was a man staring back at me. He was almost right up against the glass. I jumped up and screamed. Stepping backwards, the man sprinted away down the side of the house. Bear started barking again from the sudden chaos. I closed the blinds and checked all the others, making sure they were closed as well. From the quick glimpse I got, I didn't recognize the man. I didn't know who he was, or what he was doing here, or why he was staring at me. I tried to listen for any more indications that he was still around, but the rain outside was too loud, covering up any possible sounds. Bear seemed calmer though, so I stayed up for a while longer just to be safe, then went upstairs and had Bear sleep in my room with me. It took a long time for me to fall asleep, having a lot on my mind. But after an hour or so, I slowly dozed off. When I woke, Bear was standing up right by the bedroom door, staring at it. This was a freaky thing to see, waking up in the middle of the night. But not even seconds later, I heard something below me. A man talking. And not long after, a man on the other side of the house talking back. Their footsteps were loud, and they didn't even seem to be whispering either. It was like they didn't care if I knew that they were inside my home. My bedroom door was locked, but I had nowhere else to go. I went over to Bear quietly, trying to keep him calm, then picked him up and went over to the corner of my room, behind the bed. It took me a while to realize, but then it struck me that I hadn't heard any noises at all in the past minute. No steps or voices. This was when I took my phone out and called the police, whispering as softly as I could. As I told them my address, Bear started a low growl, then began barking and whining as two sets of footsteps started making their way up the stairs. I begged for the operator to send someone immediately. The two men started talking to each other again, but it was hard to make out their words. "Hey, we just want to talk. We're not here to hurt you." I screamed, saying I called the cops and for them to leave. I was panicking, not knowing what else to do. There was a pause afterwards. "We're here to help you," one of the men said. I didn't respond as I was busy trying to muffle my crying. "Open the door." It got quiet again. I could only hear them breathing behind the door for what felt like a whole minute, before one of them walked back down the stairs. I couldn't tell where they went downstairs or if they'd left or not, but I was sure that it was just one set of footsteps that left the bedroom door. It was so quiet though, and I couldn't hear any breathing. In the far distance, the soft sound of sirens started to get louder. A sense of safety was finally coming back. Once the sirens got closer, I heard footsteps running out of the house downstairs. But now I was unsure where the other man was. It seemed really unlikely for him to be by my door still, but I could swear I never heard him leave. I waited for the police to pull up and make their way inside. I heard them searching downstairs, then slowly make their way upstairs and knock on my door. I almost didn't want to answer, still thinking that other man had to be somewhere nearby. When I opened the door though, it was just an officer. I immediately told him about my concerns. He directed me out of the house as one of his partners continued searching. But nobody was found. The only thing they were able to find was watery footprints all around the house, as well as an unlocked window, which, to be honest, I wasn't sure if I kept locked or not. It terrified me though, feeling so confident that the other man was still there, never hearing him leave, but then there being no trace of him. It made it impossible to sleep at night, having this feeling of someone still in the house, watching me. I moved out 3 months ago. It was too much stress on my mind, having a loose end like that, especially since neither of them were ever identified or arrested. There was no clear intention the men had either, which is just another question added to the list of uncertainty. Even now, living miles away in a new apartment, I still sometimes feel like I'm not alone. I work at a convenience store at the corner of a small shopping strip. It's basically a smaller, local version of a 7-Eleven. I worked morning shifts for a while, which started at 3 a.m. and ended at 1 p.m. I agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest to require the least amount of work. All the parts of my job included tending to customers, filling the shelves, and taking out the trash, which pretty much meant I had nothing to do. It was the middle of winter at the time this happened, but I live in a warmer state, so it usually rains instead of snows. It was a light pour outside, and it was enough to keep most people away. On early mornings like these, I like to lean against the front of the building outside and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there wasn't anyone to stop me. Along the shopping strip were maybe 8 or 9 other stores connected to ours. All of them were stores with normal hours, so none of them were ever open until around 6 or 7 in the morning. So, when I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking outside, I of course assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I burned out my cigarette and tossed it in the trash, then headed back inside and around the corner. There really was nothing to do, so I was just waiting for the customer to come in and leave so I could get back to being bored alone. After a few minutes of nobody coming in though, I walked back around the corner and checked outside the door. The car was still there, parked in a parking space nearby, but the headlights were off, and as far as I could tell, nobody was inside. Again, it was lightly raining outside, and all the other stores were still closed, so I was a bit confused as to where they went. I took one last look around, seeing nobody, then closed the door and went back inside. 30 more minutes of nothing went by, and I think I was just standing in the same spot behind the counter for the whole time, spacing out. I checked the time, seeing I'd only been at work for a little over an hour, and decided I should check the trash cans around the store and toss them in the dumpster out back. I walked around each trash bin, putting the bag in the cart and replacing it with a new bag. As I was doing this, I heard a faint click sound come from outside. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but between the rain hitting the roof and the sound being somewhat far away, it was impossible to tell what it was or where exactly it came from. In the moment it happened though, I barely even thought about it. It just didn't seem like anything worth thinking about. Just another random sound these old buildings made. Once I filled the cart with all the trash bags, I rolled it into the back room and unlocked the back door that led to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing as the rain was pouring down harder now. Of course, right when I actually needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain and over to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in all the trash, I turned back and started heading for the door, but I noticed something was out of place. The store directly connected to mine had its door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there earlier than 6, so it made me think. I went back inside to get out of the rain and went out to the front door and looked at the other store's door. All the lights were off and it looked locked up and empty like it always was at this time. I thought for a few more minutes before figuring I had nothing better to do and went back outside by the dumpster and walked up to the open door. Again, all the lights were off but it seemed to lead into a small closet-type room, which then had another door, probably leading to the main storeroom. I stepped inside, standing in between the doorway so as to not make it seem like I was trying to sneak in or something. Standing inside now, I could hear someone moving around in the other room, walking, opening drawers. It sounded like they were making a mess, which then got me thinking even more. "Hey, is everything okay now?" I called out, hoping to get a reassuring response from a neighboring store worker. The noises stopped. I waited a few seconds before I realized that this was not normal, and something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside and into the rain. As I quickly made my way back to my store, I recognized something was missing from the door I had just left. It took a second to figure it out, but then I saw that there was no handle. It was just an empty hole where the handle and lock usually are. Then I looked down at the wedge that was holding the door open, seeing now that it was actually the broken door handle. I ran back into my store, locking all the doors, and called 911, as well as my store manager. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the wall connecting our stores and put my ear against it, listening to the suspected robbery taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, because they were moving quickly now, running all around, tossing or knocking things over. After 30 seconds to a minute of this, I saw lights flash outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. The footsteps quickly moved to the back of the store before a bunch of loud yelling came, which I assume was the officers. I checked out the back door after a minute, seeing a less hectic scene, and walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for coming so quickly and gave them a statement. The man who was arrested was found with a pillowcase full of nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an empty firearm, along with a variety of tools used to break down doors and locks. And, unknowing to me, he'd also broken into the store 2 spots down as well. It's unclear whether or not the man knew I was working at the time, but my store lights were on, so it isn't likely that he would have broken into my store. But several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, which may have been from a previous attempt. I lived with my older brother for about 4 years after I finished school. We shared rent on an apartment together since neither of us could afford anything on our own. But during the 4th year, my brother started making better money and he planned to move out once the lease came to an end. I wasn't making a lot, so I knew I couldn't afford to pay for the apartment alone. I looked around online for a roommate for a few months, but decided to just move out as well and find a cheaper place. I searched up until the last month of our lease at the apartment. My brother had basically moved everything out already, and there was a lot of pressure on me to find somewhere quick, but with my extremely low budget, it wasn't easy. Eventually, though, I stumbled across a listing posted by a homeowner renting out a room in their house. The man's name was Evan. I sent him a text to let him know I was interested, then kept searching. A few minutes later, he responded. We scheduled a time to call later in the day, and when we did, he explained all the details. He said he lived alone in the house and was renting out his spare bedroom, but I'd be able to use all the other rooms in the house too. It sounded great to me, so I agreed to it, and a couple weeks later, I tossed everything in a U-Haul and drove down to the house. Between this time, we'd been texting and calling, and he sent me a bunch of pictures of the house, but I hadn't had the chance to view it in person yet. I got there around noon, parking in the driveway. The house was definitely small, but it looked nice from the outside. Evan was standing in the garage, waving me over. He gave me a quick tour, then helped me unload all of my stuff into my room. Evan seemed like a regular man in his mid-30s, which was almost 10 years older than me, but I didn't really mind. He didn't hold conversations very well, though, and was somewhat shy. Anyway, we finished moving everything inside, and I dropped the U-Haul off. I Ubered back to the house, and by then it was almost 8 p.m., and I was really tired. Evan was on the couch watching TV, so I told him I was going to bed early, and I went to my room. All in all, it seemed like a decent place, and I was happy with it. I unpacked some more, then set up my bed. And by 9 o'clock, I was finally ready to sleep. I walked over to my door to lock it and turn off the lights. But as I reached my hand out, I saw the knob on the door was empty, as in, there was no lock on it. Confused, I opened the door. The lock was on the outside of the door. I stepped into the living room and asked Evan why the bedroom door locked from the outside. He looked confused and said he never noticed that, but he would switch it around tomorrow. I shrugged and said okay, then went back to my room. I was tired and not too worried about it, but it was definitely an odd find. I got in bed and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I heard someone moving around in the kitchen, which I assumed was just Evan getting water or something, so I closed my eyes again. A minute later, I heard him walking back down the hallway, but as he was passing my room, he stopped. I opened my eyes and looked at the door. He was standing out there quietly for maybe 15 seconds before I heard a click. He locked my door. My stomach dropped and I felt my face go cold as Evan walked down to his room. As soon as I heard his bedroom door shut, I got up quietly and went over to the door. I tried the handle and it wouldn't budge. I stood in shock for a few seconds, coming to reality that this man I'd just met has now locked me in a room. My fear started to turn into anger. I called out for Evan, telling him to open the door. It only took a second before I heard Evan run out of his room and over to my door. I heard him place his hand on the door, but he paused for a few seconds before he unlocked it. I swung the door open right away. What the fuck was that? I confronted him. Evan was stumbling words out, saying he just wanted to make sure he was safe because he didn't know me. I understood that concern, but locking someone in a room was not a smart way to go about it. I told him that I was going to pack up and leave in the morning, and I stayed up all night on the couch in the living room, waiting for the U-Haul store to open. At 9 o'clock, I looked into the hallway, seeing Evan's bedroom door was still closed, hopefully meaning he was still asleep. Then I drove straight there and drove the U-Haul back to the house. When I went inside, though, Evan's bedroom door was open. Evan, I called out. I walked over to his room and peeked my head inside. His room was empty. I moved my eyes around the room in disbelief. Seeing as things were only getting weirder, I backed out and got straight to moving my stuff. I powered through 2 hours of moving boxes and taking apart my bed. I only had 2 boxes left. I ran inside and picked up another, then rushed to the front door until Evan appeared in the doorway. "Move," I said. He stared at me, emotionless. After a few seconds, he stepped aside. I hurried past him and shoved the box in the U-Haul. The last box was half full of random food I kept from my old pantry at the apartment. I decided to just leave it. Evan was freaking me out, and I wanted to get away from him as soon as possible. I started closing the back of the U-Haul before Evan interrupted. "You forgot this." He held out the last box. "Oh, yeah, thanks." I grabbed it from him and climbed back in the truck. I felt him watching me as I stacked the box, and when I turned, he had his hand on the door. He started pulling it down, trying to close me in. I was able to stop him before the door was even halfway down. I shoved him on the ground, but he got up and ran. Not in the house, but off into the trees away from the house. I didn't know what to think, but I didn't care. I quickly shut the back door and drove away. My brother was nice enough to let me stay with him until I found a new place. I don't know what happened at that house, or what would have happened, but there was definitely something very wrong going on. I moved across the state to a newly built house. My previous landlord decided he wanted to sell his house, so when our lease agreement was up, he kicked me out. I decided to also lease this new house, but I was honestly really excited for this place. As soon as I moved in, though, I noticed my neighbor across the street staring at me several times within the first couple days. He was a middle-aged man, but didn't seem to ever be away from his house. I tried to brush it off, assuming that maybe he was just curious about the new person in the neighborhood. But the more I saw him, the more I realized there was something off about him. He never spoke to anyone, he never smiled, and he never laughed. He just stayed in his house, watching. I would catch glimpses of him through my window and see him standing in his driveway at odd hours of the night. It was starting to freak me out. One night, as I was settling in for bed, I heard a noise outside. It was a scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy object across the ground. I peeked out the window, and there was my neighbor, dragging what looked like a large ladder across his lawns. It was really late. I had no idea why he would be needing to do any work on his house at this time. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid because I was in a new place surrounded by new people, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about my neighbor. I tried to calm myself and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I saw him outside again. This time, he was standing at the end of my driveway, staring at me through my window. I pulled the curtain shut and I tried to ignore him, but the feeling of him watching me gave me chills. I didn't like that he was by my driveway either. So I quickly got into my car and pulled out of the garage. He was back in his yard by then, but he watched me as I drove away. Things grew a lot worse from here. One night, as I laid in bed, I could clearly hear someone walking in the grass in my backyard, which was fenced in. I got up and looked out the window, but the footsteps stopped. I waited in my bed for probably 30 minutes, but I didn't hear any more footsteps. I got up and checked the window one more time to be safe, and far back in the yard was a figure. It was hard to make them out because it was so dark, but there was definitely someone standing there, watching me. I backed away and called the police, but the man had left before they arrived. I told them all about my creepy neighbor, but they told me there was no evidence of any wrongdoing and that my neighbor had never been in trouble with the law. I was basically on my own unless something more serious actually happened. I started to take precautions, locking my doors and windows and avoiding being outside as much as possible. Even then, I didn't feel much safer. I'd been at the new house for almost 2 weeks at this point, and even thought about breaking my lease agreement. Then something happened. I got home from work late and pretty much went straight to bed. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something thud against the side of the house. It sounded like it was right up against the wall outside my bedroom though, which was on the second-story floor of my house. I slowly got out of bed, heart racing in my chest, and pulled the curtains back from my window. I jumped back and screamed, seeing my neighbor's face staring at me from just inches away from my window. He was standing on a ladder, trying to look into my bedroom. He quickly climbed down and ran away. I called the police again, and just a few minutes later, they caught him trying to get the ladder down. While he didn't admit to what he was doing, it was very obvious. In the following days, one of my neighbors came by and explained that they had some weird encounters with that neighbor guy as well. They said they saw him looking through their windows as they were coming home from work one day. Part of me wonders if they could have prevented this whole thing from happening to me if they had just reported the guy. But either way, it's over now. I moved into my new house last year during winter. It was a beautiful, spacious home with a big backyard. It was my first house ever buying. Moving was a bit of a hassle though, because I was alone, so I had to move everything by myself. I pulled up with the truck early in the morning and shoveled all the snow off the driveway, then started bringing all of the boxes and furniture inside. I finished pretty late, around dinner time. I went back outside and locked up the truck, planning to drop it off the following morning. I don't remember doing much for the rest of the night. I probably just watched something on my phone, but I didn't have my bed set up yet, so I slept on the couch downstairs. It wasn't the most comfortable couch, but as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was walking up to my porch. I sat up and listened carefully, looking at the front door. The sound stopped just before they reached the door, though. I waited for a while until I thought I was just hearing things and ended up falling asleep. In the morning, I woke up to find that the front door was unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it before bed. I checked for any signs of someone walking around outside, but there wasn't anything. I dropped off the truck, then spent the whole day unpacking and setting up the rest of the furniture. I had mostly everything done by the end of the day. At 6, I went out for a quick dinner and got home around 7. As I pulled into my driveway, though, I saw something strange in the snow outside my house. I parked and got out. There were footsteps in the snow, leading right up to my front door. I looked all around and tried to follow the footprints from where they came, but they ended by the sidewalk, which had already been shoveled. It could have just been a neighbor wanting to say hi, and that's the excuse I told myself to put me at ease. I finished the last of the unpacking, and before bed, I checked all the doors and windows. I walked up to the front door and immediately noticed it was unlocked again. I got my key and tried it, making sure it worked and couldn't be unlocked without it. But sure enough, everything seemed to work just as it was supposed to. I was confident I'd locked the door and kept it locked all day. I just didn't understand why this was happening though. Nothing was missing from the house, and there were no signs of an intruder. I mean, it was cold, wet, and snowy outside. If someone had come inside, they would have left watery shoe prints everywhere. I made sure the door was locked, then went up to my bedroom to shower before bed. As I was getting out of the shower though, I heard something downstairs. It was soft and hard to distinguish. Usually, I would assume there was nothing, but with everything going on, I had to check. I got dressed and walked down the stairs slowly. I turned the corner around the stairs, and right in the hallway was a man. He was facing me, standing still, with the front door opened behind him. I was in some sort of shock, frozen in place. After a moment, I sprinted back up the stairs and locked myself in my room. I didn't hear him following me, but I was still terrified. Then I heard footsteps walking through the rooms downstairs. I took this chance to call the police as the man downstairs continued walking around. After maybe 2 minutes, I heard the front door slam shut and the footsteps leaving the property. The police found nothing of use and suggested putting up security cameras and changing the locks on the door. I did both, but the man never came back. I almost wish he did so that I could catch him on the cameras, because now I feel like every day I'm just waiting in fear for him to come back. I'm not sure what he was doing or wanted to do, but I hope I never have to know. I was 21 when this happened. I was shopping at Walmart and getting some groceries. While I was there was a random woman that looked to be around my age who came up to me. She asked me who I was, and I told her my name. She said that I seemed interesting, and she had asked for my social media. I gave her my Facebook, and she laughed. But as she laughed, she kind of looked at me, giving me the creepiest smile, and kind of did the "I'm watching you" kind of gesture. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think too much into it, and I continued my shopping. When I checked out at the self-checkout, I saw the same woman there. I checked out, loaded my groceries in my car, and drove back to my house. When I got home, I'd got a friend request from the same woman. I confirmed it, and she had sent me a text message asking how my day is. I told her it was fine, and I was going to be a little busy today, and that I'll talk to her later. She said it was fine, and a couple of hours later, when night fell, she had sent me another message. I couldn't believe what it said. She asked me if I wanted to hook up and have sex. That she's never had sex before, but that she wanted to try it with me. I told her I was bisexual, and that I had a boyfriend. She then replied back with, "Don't worry, he doesn't need to know that. It'll stay between us." I told her I wasn't interested, and that we can just be friends. But she said she wanted to be more than friends. I then replied back with, what part of "I'm not interested" aren't you understanding? She had totally went off on me after that, cussing me out and like totally losing it. My boyfriend came over to my house later that night to spend the night. When he arrived, I'd showed him all the messages the woman sent me. He was disgusted. And then, about 3 hours later, at 1 in the morning, we heard 4 loud bangs at the door, then someone screaming. It was the woman. I guess she had looked up my name and found my address, and she had actually showed up in my house. She was screaming like a psycho. "If I can't have you, nobody can." I told her to get the fuck off my property, or I'd be calling the police. She said she had a knife on her, and that if I didn't let her in, she was going to cut herself. My boyfriend then immediately called the police, and they were literally here in about 5 minutes. As soon as they arrived, they arrested her. I showed the officer all of the messages, and she said to drive to the police station to make a statement. My boyfriend and I got in my car, and we drove to the station. The both of us gave our statements, and I ended up filing a restraining order against her. I've since deleted the messages and blocked the woman's account. Now I only friend people that I actually know and trust. Please be careful who you talk to on social media, as you never know what could happen. I just want to say, when all this happened, I was 18, and I was young, innocent, and naive. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, I would never ever let this happen again. It was my freshman year at college, and as one could imagine, I was excited to be on my own for once in my life. So excited to be on my own that I decided I was going to take summer classes on campus. That way I wouldn't have to worry about coming in when the big crowd of freshmen came. And I would also already know where everything was. Plus, it meant I could get away from my parents even faster. But mainly, all I could think about was boys. You see, I never dated anyone through high school, so I thought I would find my one true love at college. Because of course, that's what all the movies told me anyways. About 2 weeks go by, and me and one of my roommates, I had 4 by the way, we're all hanging out in the lounge area showing off pictures from Instagram. Well, we're showing our friends, family, etc. Well, my roommate, who I'll call Tracy, had showed me a picture of her and these 2 guys. One of the guys was Tracy's boyfriend, and the other was Tracy's boyfriend's best friend. I'll call him Sean. Now, Sean was very attractive, and I even told Tracy that I thought he was hot. And she told me that he went to the tag college near us, and that he was single. Now, a day or 2 goes by after this, and she tells me she told Sean that I was interested in him, and he wanted to know if he could follow me on Instagram so he could DM me. At the time, I really trusted Tracy, because she seemed like a really cool, chill girl. So I excitedly told her yes. Oh, how I really wish that I never told her yes. I talked to Sean for about a week before I was comfortable enough to give him my phone number. At first, he seemed super sweet. He would always send me text messages first thing in the mornings, telling me to have a good day at class, and that he couldn't wait to FaceTime me that night. And we would FaceTime every night. At first, I really loved it, because I'd never had a boy give me so much attention. And like I said before, I never dated anyone, so I was just really over the moon that he was even interested enough to talk to me. But it started to get annoying. He would text me almost every second of the day and try to FaceTime me at least 4 times. When I wouldn't respond to him, he would ask if I was okay, why I wasn't answering him, and if I was seeing another guy. It would make him really mad if I was. I, of course, once seeing the messages, would try to reassure him that I was okay, and that I wasn't seeing anyone. Like I said in the beginning, I was young and naive, so I didn't really see it as a red flag. Things kept going downhill though. It came to a point where he had started asking for pictures of me. Either just selfies or pictures of me in the mirror. I wouldn't send them though because I just wasn't comfortable. And he would brush it off, saying he was fine, and that I could send him pictures of myself whenever I was ready. One day I was in class for a long time because it was lab, and it started at 7 p.m., and it wouldn't end until 10 p.m. that night. For those of you who don't know, labs in college can last from 2 to 4 hours, and mine just happened to be 3 hours that night. Once class ended, I headed to my dorm, and I took out my phone. I clicked the button on the side, lighting up the screen. I had 380 unread text messages, 10 missed calls, and 3 voicemails from Sean. Before I could even react or read all the messages, my phone started to ring. Instead of it being Sean, it was actually my dad. He had called to make sure that I was doing all right, because he had gotten a load from the phone company that I'd gotten all those messages. I was still on the family phone plan. I don't know why, but I just lied to him and laughed it off, saying that I was just in a group chat with a bunch of girls from school. Once I got off the phone with my dad, I then quickly went to look at all of the messages I had gotten. Most of them were demanding why I wasn't answering him, and that he would come and find me if I didn't answer him. The voicemails were crude, and mostly of him saying he was going to find me, and that when he did, he was going to punish me for not answering him. After this, I just completely blocked him on everything I could think of, completely freaked out about the whole thing. About a week goes by, and I start to slowly forget all about the incident, trying not to think much about it. At least, that's what I was trying to do. During that whole week, I felt like someone was watching me, but I just brushed it off as me being paranoid. At the end of the week, my roommate Tracy, who I'd been avoiding, then comes up to me shouting at me, saying how I broke Sean's heart and he had called her crying, saying how he didn't understand why I started talking to him. I couldn't even get a word in because of how fast she was talking. She finally called me a self-centered bitch and then walked away. I went to class right after that, not realizing that I forgot to lock my dorm room. You see, I lived with 4 girls, and each girl had their own room, which would lock from the outside with a key. Well, when I came back from class, I noticed that my door was slightly cracked open. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hesitated going in. My hands were shaking terribly, I finally got the nerve to push it open. Nothing. There was nothing out of place, or so it seemed. Even though there was nothing out of place, I could have sworn that I closed the door before leaving for class. Even though I don't remember if I locked it or not, I know for sure that I closed the door. So I asked all of my roommates, including Tracy, if anyone had gone into my room that day, and they all denied it, even Tracy. But I just knew in my heart someone had been in there. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So one weekend, when I knew that all of my roommates were going to be out of town, I switched dorm buildings, and I roomed with a girl that I'd gone to be close friends with. After I moved in with her, I then told her all that had happened, and she said that she would walk with me to my classes, which thankfully, we had most of our classes together, except for the one night I had lab. She would walk with me to my lab, and then wait until my lab was done to then walk with me back to the dorm. One night though, she had actually gone out of town to go see her parents or something. I was walking back from my lab, and it had gotten a little late that night. I heard someone walking behind me, but I didn't pay any attention to it, since class was just let out. But as I was walking, I could hear the steps getting closer, so I started to pick up my walking speed. At this point, I could tell someone was following me, and I was really afraid to look back. As the footsteps increased and got faster, I started running as fast as I could. Now let me tell you, I'm not athletic by any means. Somehow though, adrenaline probably, I was able to sprint to my dorm building, still hearing someone running behind me. And I thankfully already had my keycard out to get into the building. I then swamped it on the door, and then slammed it shut behind me. Looking up from slamming the door, I see someone who's probably about 10 feet away from the door, staring at me. Even though the person's hood was up and I couldn't see their face, I could clearly see that they were looking at me. And I just knew that it was Sean. Not wasting any more time, I go to the RA that was up that night, now bawling, telling them what had just happened. He called the police, and I then told them everything that happened. But they basically just said that they couldn't do anything since I didn't see his face. After all this happened, I called my friend and I told her what happened, and she never went out of town again if I ever had any late night classes. I eventually ended up deciding that college just wasn't for me, and I dropped out. I moved back to my home state, and I went to cosmetology school to become a hairdresser. I still haven't dated anyone yet though. Maybe it's the fear of something like that happening again. I'll never know. I do know that I'm super careful with who I talk to now, and who I give my social media and phone number to. I'm still scared to go to places by myself, even though it's been years and I'm states away. Even so, I really hope that I never see Sean again. My name is Zach, and this is the true story of what happened when I was just 13. It was September, and I'd just gone back to school after summer break. Everything was fine for the first week. I was happy to be reconnecting with my friends and generally being back to school, but I didn't know it would be so short-lived. On that Sunday night, I had dinner with my family before heading up to my room, and I glanced out of my window to see an orange van parked there. Not out of the ordinary, as I lived on quite a busy road, so I thought nothing of it, and I'd played some video games before bed. The morning after, I was awoken by the sound of a rough engine, and it was the same orange van pulling up to the same spot. I thought it was a little odd at how early he parked up, but again, I just went about my day. It took me around 6 to 8 minutes to get to school, so I always walked there. Everything in my day was going fine. While I watched, I decided to have my crafty cigarette, as I did behind the bike sheds at school. But when I moved left, all I felt was a chill go down my spine, as I had been seeing that same orange van parked across the road. This happened until Friday, before a man around 50 to 60 jumped out and then approached me. At this point, I was really scared, and I didn't know what to do. The man who I'll call Ron, had started asking me many questions about me and my family. If we argue often, how many people I live with, and so on. I was already freaked out at this point, so I just ran home as fast as I could. When I finally got home, I was thinking that maybe he got the hint, and I felt just a little bit more relaxed. Until an hour later, and he was then parked in the same place. At this point, I was so happy it was the weekend. I decided to stay inside all weekend long and just play video games with my friends online. It had turned 6 p.m. on a Saturday, and I was feeling so relaxed. I hadn't even looked out the window. I was about to start a new match with my friends. My phone rang. I looked, and it said no caller ID. I thought it was my mother, as she would often use her work phone to call me and my siblings. I answered the phone, and as I usually say hello, I got no answer back in return. Just a very heavy breathing. This happened about 4 times before a voice then finally spoke. "Hello, Zach." I instantly recognized it. It was Ron. I started to panic, and I looked outside, and there he was. He was looking up out of his car window at me and smiling. I was way too scared to tell any of my family. So I phoned my friend who I'll refer to as Jack, and I told him everything. He instantly knew that I was telling the truth because he had noticed the orange van around the school too. We spoke about it for over an hour before we decided to call it a night. But as soon as the call finished, my phone rang again. This time I answered, and I then asked what he wanted, to which he then replied back with,
"You. I've been watching you closely on Instagram."
I just hung up after that, and I went to bed really scared. The day after this happened, my friend Jack came to my home to walk with me to school after I called him to tell him the orange van was still outside. We'll have my home, only this time as we're walking, the orange van had followed us soilway. This is when we decided to run. As we got to the end of my road, the van sped up and then blocked us off. Ron stepped out of the van, grabbed my arm, then saying, "I want you. You're coming with me." He also put Jack in the back of the van to stop him from talking too. I then asked him, "Why are you doing this? Where are we going?" To which he then replied back with, "I already told you. I want you. We're going home." As he then shut the van door. Me and Jack panicked as Ron started driving away with us. We searched everywhere in the van for something to help get us out. Just as we had given up, Jack had spotted a piece of the van's metal lining that was loose. We started to pull it off as quietly as possible. As it finally came off, it made a loud noise, and Ron then banged on the van, shouting at us, "Quiet," while driving. Me and Jack then took the metal, and we forced open one of the doors. Ron was driving at a high speed, so we had no choice but to jump out. There were 2 people who were walking down the street at this time. They came to our aid as we jumped, and they kept us safe until the police came. Me and Jack told the police the full story, but Ron and his van were never found. I'm not really sure, but I think he was using fake plates on the van. How else would he have not been found? I know this might sound fake, but I really was almost kidnapped by this psycho in his van. A month after all this happened, I had finally started to rebuild all my confidence with all the security measures in place. I was finally starting to feel like the old me, and I made sure that my Instagram account was private. I came home with my mother from school, feeling happy, and decided to play online games with Jack. Later that night, I got a notification on Instagram, a new message request. I opened it, and my blood turned cold. Upon reading it, it said, "I'm still watching you," and I dropped my phone to the ground. After that happened, I deleted all of my social media accounts from that day forward, and I'm probably not going to make any new accounts for a really long time. Dear Your Honor, I've been a model inmate for 5 years, and have my first parole hearing in 2 months. I never asked the state for anything, but I'm writing this letter, pleading for your intervention, while I accept my responsibility for my actions that day. Mitigating circumstances led to it, and I implore you to listen. I was laid off from work due to the economic shutdown. As my unemployment benefits ran out, I started delivering food for various restaurants as an Uber Eats driver. Normally, this can be a pretty lucrative side job, but my hometown was small and rural. I often had to make deliveries 20 or more miles out of town. In truth, most of my profits went towards keeping the gas in my tank filled, but I was still making just enough to cover most of my rent. As such, I kept at it, hoping it was a temporary setback until I found a new job. I delivered to some sketchy places in my time with Uber Eats, but none were as off-putting as the trailer park I pulled into that day. Children ran between trailers, unintended in their underwear, with dirt smeared all over their arms. People shambled like zombies in front of their homes, visibly intoxicated. One woman in a rocking chair had a hypodermic needle sticking out of her arm. Unsure of where to go, I checked my phone and saw one note. RV. I drove through the trailer park until I came to the end of the park. Sitting in one of the lots was an ancient RV, rusted with age and visibly covered in dirt and other stains. Most of the windows were busted out, and all of them were covered with black garbage bags. I stepped out of my car with the bag of food, wading through the beer cans and liquor bottles that littered the way. The air outside smelled of ammonia, so I held my breath as I tapped against the door. I nearly dropped the bag of food when the man answered. The smell from the RV reminded me of my grandmother's old cat, a thick smell of days-old piss that nearly knocked me over. Through watering eyes, I saw my customer. He was over 6 feet tall, pale-skinned, bare-chested, and bald. While he wasn't overly muscular, 2 things immediately raised my guard. The first were his tattoos. Over his left breast was a swastika, and on the right, a Confederate flag. While this marked him as a man I did not want to have dealings with, the large handgun tucked into his shorts made me want to run screaming to my car. The man rested his hand on the gun. The hell you want, limp dick? I tried to answer, but my mouth had gone dry. I swallowed and tried again. Uber Eats. You ordered Chinese? The man frowned at me. Took you long enough, didn't it? I tried not to let out a breath of relief when he took his hand away from the gun. He stuck it into one of his pockets and pulled out a wad of cash, and I relaxed. I'm from the rural red state, so neither the tattoos nor the gun were uncommon. Maybe I would get out of this with a story to tell and a generous tip. Bubba. Something thudded from one side of the RV, growing closer until another man came out. He had matching tattoos, but was shorter and squatter than his roommate. He proudly held up a baggie full of what looked like rock salt. Latest batch is ready. Just need your seal of approval. He slapped the bag into the other man's hands. Then his eyes widened when he saw me. Oh, sweet, my crab rangoons. Bubba turned and spat. Seal of approval, my ass. Last batch you cooked left up half of customers blind and the other half dead. You tried out, Rooster. Nothing doing, buddy. I'm the cook. You're the manager. That was the deal. What kind of cook doesn't try his own? Bubba trailed off as he stared at me, his lips parting into a cruel smile revealing rotten teeth. Say, friend, you look like you've been working real hard. Come on in, kick your feet up for a while. Oh, no, I stammered. I mean, it's really nice to offer, but I've got other deliveries I need to make. Bubba pinned me to the RV in a flash and placed the gun to my head. I wasn't asking. They dragged me inside. Rooster cackled the whole time. The inside of the RV was even dirtier than outside. They pushed me towards a stained and torn couch, and I tripped over discarded pizza and cereal boxes as I crashed into it. Bubba was on me a minute later, the gun placed to my head. Snort this, or I'll blow your head off. Brewster placed some of the crystals on a fold-out table and grounded them into a powder with the palm of his hand, then handed me a straw from a discarded Coke can. I had never tried any hard substance before. I didn't even drink that much, but with a gun placed to my head, I did what I needed to do to survive. My nose and throat were on fire as heat washed over me. The world erupted into flames, while Rooster and Bubba transformed. Their skin melted, revealing skeletal torsos with smoking embers for eyes. They cackled again as I bolted from the table and out the door. I climbed into my car as eyeballs exploded around me and hit the gas, but the world was the same barren hellscape everywhere I went. One of the creatures appeared before me, so I screamed and plowed my car into it, and the world went black. When the police pulled me from my airbag, the world was back to normal. But they slipped a pair of handcuffs on me as the EMTs finished sipping up a mangled old lady into a body bag. I told them my story, but the RV was long gone, and the county attorney said I made the whole thing up. The jury agreed and sentenced me to 10 years for driving under the influence, reckless endangerment, and vehicular homicide. I was content to serve my sentence until yesterday, when 2 new inmates were brought in. It was Bubba and Rooster, and they smiled at me as their cell doors closed. They remembered me. That's why I'm begging you, Your Honor. Please transfer me to any prison but this one to serve out the rest of my sentence. For some context, I live in a major city and currently don't do a lot of driving due to ongoing issues with my car, plus the pandemic, has made me turn to more delivery apps in general. So the other day around 1 p.m., I decided to order some lunch after doing a lot of cleaning. I placed the Uber Eats order and found something to watch while I waited for the food. Within a few minutes, a driver accepted the order, and I noticed right away that the driver, Anthony, was on a bike, didn't have a profile picture or any deliveries on record. At first, I wasn't alarmed at all. I was almost amused, like, wow, I guess I'm this person's first ever customer. But then, a full 30 minutes passes with no driver movement on the app. And at this point, I think maybe something is glitching out or the driver is stuck. I contact support via the chat option, and they ended up assigning a new driver because they couldn't reach the first one. Odd, but whatever. Now is when it starts getting a little weird. The new driver assigned is in the same exact spot as the original driver was. They also were on a bike, also have no profile picture, and have no prior deliveries as well. And this driver's name was Lull. I let another 20 minutes pass with no driver movement before I messaged them myself and said, "Hi there, is there any issues with the order?" The app shows that the driver saw the message, but no response. All this time, I'm checking to see if Uber Eats is maybe experiencing issues. None that I could find, but at this point, I'm definitely weirded out. I'm mostly just hungry. So I contact support again to request some assistance. They reassign the driver again and apologize for the inconvenience. Same deal. They also tried to contact the driver with no response. Finally, the third driver assigned is the exact same scenario. Same spot, on a bike, no profile picture, no prior deliveries. Only this time, the name is Robert. and before I can react and go about canceling the order, because at this point, I'm tired of dealing with this, he suddenly has my food and immediately messages me the following. "Hello, I have your food. What's your phone number?" And I respond right away with, "I'm not super comfortable giving my phone number out. You can just meet me when you get here." He responded again with, "What's your number? Be there in 10. How old are you?" At this point, the alarm bells were going off, and I contacted support immediately to have the order canceled and get further assistance. I get connected to Uber's safety team, who informs me that the order has been cancelled. I'll be refunded, and started taking down the details of the strange interactions. As I'm giving the woman on the phone the info she needs, I'm starting to calm down, thinking this was just some creep or something. That's when I heard a man's voice at the front door. "Hey, Sarah, I have your food." I can't even describe the chill that went down my spine because of the way he said it. Making things even worse, the Uber safety woman on the phone with me heard him as well and goes, "Is that him? But we cancelled the order." I poked my head around the door. The main heavy door was open. Metal screen door was closed and locked, but allowed us to see each other. And when he saw me on the phone, he went from smiling to looking furious. He suddenly got right up against the door and kept asking who I was on the phone with. And at this point, I've started asking him to please leave because he's making me uncomfortable. But he was getting more and more angry, and at this point, started pounding on my door and grabbing, shaking the doorknob while shouting to let him in. The woman on the phone was asking if I was okay. The man was still shouting. So basically, I'm in full meltdown mode at this point, and hurriedly closed the heavy door to lock it. The man is becoming borderline belligerent as he kicks my door, and the woman tells me to call the police. He ended up walking away from my house about a minute after that and back up to the sidewalk. And for a moment, I thought he finally f***ed off. So I finished my conversation with the Uber safety woman so she could submit the report. Once she submitted it, I called the police and told them what happened. They weren't incredibly helpful at first since he didn't actually break in or put his hands on me. And they told me if he came back to call again, and they would send an officer out. I did end up having to call them again and give a full report, plus the description of the man since he didn't end up leaving right away. He stayed in the neighborhood for almost 20 minutes. According to one of my neighbors, after she heard the yelling, she saw the man I described walk back up from my house to the sidewalk and hop into a truck with another man in the passenger seat. And apparently, they just sat there, staring at the people walking by and being incredibly sketchy. And that's when she walked back towards my house and asked me what happened. Luckily, she was able to give the cop a description of the vehicle and the other man as well. So, basically, this was a very bizarre and uncomfortable experience, and I wanted to share it to maybe see if anyone has experienced anything else like this, because honestly, I'm still pretty shaken up, and will be avoiding delivery apps for quite a long time. I have OCD with borderline BVD. For those of you without a PhD, that means I experience uncontrollable urges to repeat a certain behavior while being constantly stressed that people in my life will abandon me. If you like me to simplify that, I'm a neat freak and control freak. My entire life, I've been in and out of relationships, in and out of therapy, and bounced between jobs. When the pandemic hit, believe it or not, my life improved exponentially. Now, I can work remotely from home and be the master of my own castle. No pesky visitors, no unwanted intrusions on my time or space, and nobody but myself to clean up after. But now, looking back, Those early days of quarantine feel like a more innocent time. Back when I was more innocent and naive to believe that the virus was a simple contagion. Back before I got the glasses. I lived alone at the end of a cul-de-sac. My house had been a foreclosure that I'd snatched up when the economy had cratered, expecting to sink some money into it and then flip it. But I'd gotten lazy and stayed. On one side, my next-door neighbor were the Ruggles, an elderly retired couple. On the other side were the Hinderlands, a family that had 3 energetic rugrats. I felt boxed in a very different vibe. The Ruggles yard was impeccably manicured, with gardens of prize rose bushes and heirloom tomatoes. And the Hinderlands yard, well, looked like a shaggy recycling center for used Fisher-Price playsets. I tried to steer clear of both of their yards and activities, carefully checking from various interior windows to ensure the coast was clear before venturing outside. The glasses seemed like a goof. I always kept a well-stocked inventory of household cleaning supplies. But once I started my online searches for industrial-grade cleaning solvents and PPE, suddenly my whole worldview of pandemic-related spam began flooding my inbox. They were called coronavirus highs. They weren't being sold by any of the online wholesalers I frequented. They were simply a pop-up ad that must have been triggered for my daily shopping habits. The ad said, "Now you have the power to see COVID-19. Our remarkable scientific breakthrough technology means you never have to fight the virus without seeing it." Imagine a pair of aviator goggles with polarizing orange and green lenses. Price $289.99. Cabin fever, a fear of germs, and poor impulse control are a toxic combo. The glasses checked off so many of my OCD boxes that even if it was a scam, which I'm pretty sure that it was, I couldn't resist the sales pitch. So of course, I bought the coronavirus eyes, paying an additional $59.99 for same-day delivery. However, I kept my expectations low. How could a pair of goggles possibly show you COVID-19? An hour later, I watched as the FedEx driver drove around the cul-de-sac. I got my face mask and gloves, reaching to the front door, just as the package was being dropped off on the welcome mat. "Thanks," I said to the FedEx guy. "Starve the virus, huh? Don't become a statistic." I ripped open the box and unraveled the bubble wrap. The goggles were heavier than I expected. The added heft, as well as the glossy polarized lenses and finely machined assembly, made them feel like legitimate virus-displaying eyewear. I took a deep breath and slipped them on. And nothing. Just a blurry-eyed view of the world. No bright particles wafting along the air currents. No swirly patterns of neon-colored spores. Not a single speck of lethal virus. My disappointment quickly gave way to serenity. There wasn't an airborne viral activity in my foyer or front yard, because my little corner of the world was virus-free. I made a quick scan of the Ruggles house with the coronavirus eyes and saw a stranger's face peering out of their attic window. I immediately recoiled, almost tripping on my front porch rocker. The face wasn't that of Mr. or Mrs. Ruggles, and as far as I knew, they weren't hosting anybody and weren't receiving visitors. I carefully skirted around my hedges and garage, getting into position for a better view. I peeked around the corner. The face in the attic window was hairless with a pug nose, buck-toothed grin, and a set of bulging blue eyes that gave my heart palpitations. The eyes were so grotesquely large for the rest of the face, and it looked like racquetballs had gotten lodged in the orbital sockets. Think Marty Feldman eyes on steroids, and they were staring expectantly down the street, as if waiting for someone. I slipped off the coronavirus eyes and the face in the attic window vanished. Panic and confusion struck me. I resisted the urge to put the goggles back on, because if the face was visible again, then the coronavirus eyes were showing me something that nobody else could see. Sirens, ambulance sirens, they were getting closer. I slipped back on my goggles and checked the attic window. The face was gone. The sun was going down behind the tree line, plunging the cul-de-sac into dusk. The blaring ambulance came speeding around the corner, right into the Ruggles driveway. I retreated to my front porch rocker and watched with morbid fascination as the emergency techs raced inside the house with a stretcher. Less than 5 minutes later, they were wheeling poor Mr. Ruggles back to the ambulance. He was very pale and gasping for breath. Mrs. Ruggles, beset with tears, followed along. A nagging little voice in my head told me to put the glasses back on. Reluctantly, slowly, I did so. The coronavirus eyes revealed 2 more people. One was actually riding atop the stretcher. It was a massively obese woman in a black dress, straddling Mr. Ruggles' chest. Her folds of fat stacked atop each other like layers of blubber, or sagging so low they nearly engulfed him. She wore a dark, wide-brimmed hat that veiled most of her face, except for her very prominent quadruple chin. Her immense weight appeared to be the cause of Mr. Ruggles' belabored breathing. Walking alongside the stretcher was a similarly dressed woman, black dress and wide-brimmed hat. Yet she was short and thin. The only part of her face I could see was a sharply hooked nose and upturned chin. The end points of the nose and chin were so extremely curved, they almost touched. She was carrying a cast iron teapot that was dispensing a plume of green gas. She held the teapot near Mr. Ruggles' face, directing the noxious-looking fumes into his airways. Neither the emergency techs nor the Ruggles seemed to be aware of the pair of black-clad women. I lifted the goggles off my eyes. Both women were invisible to the naked eye. The whole outrageous procession loaded into the ambulance, and off they went, sirens blaring into the dusk. I turned and headed back inside my house, but that nagging little voice began trumpeting inside my head. I slipped back on the coronavirus eyes. That face with the freak show eyes was looking out from my office window. Staring down the street, like it was waiting for someone to arrive. I got in my car and hightailed it out of the cul-de-sac. I never went back. I finally flipped the house and, from the makers of the coronavirus eyes, I ordered a pair of Ebola ears. Do you think there's a link? I finished buttoning my shirt. It was tailor-made, each button an equal measure apart, polished uniform black dots against the navy blue fabric. Both the shirt and my dress pants were freshly pressed. I took one last look in the mirror and sighed at my hair. My hair was always the hardest thing to manage, making sure it lined up perfectly and no strand was out of place. That's why instead, I opted to keep it short, buzzed nearly to the scalp. It was practical, not stylish, which was more important. At the same time, though, I wish I could exhibit more style before I left for the date. I was cutting it close, but I felt the familiar tug dragging me towards my room. My bed was neatly made, the covers tucked in at the corners, and a single pillow set at the center of the headboard. The books that lined my shelves were all meticulously arranged in order, alphabetically by the author's last name. And yet, my eyes glanced over the contents of the shelf against my will, double-checking, even though I knew there was no reason for them to be out of place. I was about halfway to the door when the tug pulled at me hard. My fingers twitched and itched like a million unseen insects swarming over them, even though I knew that it couldn't be the case. They're clean, goddammit. Just ignore it. It was a battle that raged in my mind every day for as long as I can remember, and a battle that I always lost. I huffed in disgust and ran to the bathroom. I cranked on the hot water to the faucet. Steam rose, fogging the mirror, and the sting of the scalding water was an instant relief. The soap helped protect against the burn, and the foam provided a soothing relief to the battlefield of my warped mind. 10 minutes passed. 15 minutes late, but Kelly greeted me with a smile and waved her hand. Nodding towards her, I walked over and sat across from her. The small piece of fabric away before sitting it back in front of her. I tried to pretend like nothing had happened, but everything okay? She asked. Yeah. I awkwardly cleared my throat and took a sip of my water. Sorry, I'm just a little nervous. I don't date much. The date went well enough after that. I listened to her jokes, genuinely laughed, felt relieved that Kelly was more than just a pretty face. Even if that's why I asked her out. I managed to keep intruders under control, stopping only once to polish the watermarks of our silverware. This caused another upturned look from her. It stopped when the waiter tripped and spilled a plate of ravioli all over me. The dish was cold, apparently being returned by an unpressed customer, and yet it still felt like it burned as the dark red sauce poured over me, staining my meticulously arranged wardrobe. Without a word, I bolted up from my chair and practically ran to the bathroom. I already had the hot water cranked up. Approached me. My sir, it looks like you've had... Get the fuck away from me. My outburst startled him into silence, but I didn't care about hurting his feelings. The grip in my mind tugged me towards the water, noticing the... My hands were soapy and began rubbing. The sauce was like a malicious aura, staining my whole body. But what could I do? I couldn't exactly take off my shirt, so I focused on the... She gasped and looked down at my hands, red and throbbing from spending so much. She stood silently for a minute, holding my hands until my breathing steadied. I stared at her, but she kept talking. I've got a cousin with him. You're showing a lot of the signs that he does. Yeah. The admission fucking wait with it. Table. My bucket already arranged to catch the excess blood after I slit her throat. Pulled on my pair of rubber gloves and admired my collection lining the walls. A dozen